At my parents' 40th anniversary party, I dropped to the floor grasping my throat as my airway swelled shut. Instead of calling for help, my mother leaned over me, her designer gown brushing the spilled champagne, and hissed, "Quit faking it and get in the kitchen. You are embarrassing us in front of the pastor." My father just shook his head and called me lazy. I thought I was going to die right there on the imported rug. Then my brother's best friend pushed through the crowd, checked my pulse, and screamed for an ambulance. What my family did not know, as they complained about the sirens ruining their cake cutting, was that the daughter they treated like a servant actually owned the bank that held the deed to their precious mansion. Before I tell you the rest of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever survived a toxic family and built your own empire. Growing up in Atlanta meant privilege to outsiders when they looked at my family. But inside our sprawling mansion, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house, with its manicured lawn and grand columns, was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom became my sanctuary and my prison. From elementary school through college, I maintained straight grades and tried to earn the affection that my parents freely showered on my older brother. My parents, Beatrice and Marcus Washington Sr., were pillars of the local community. They ran a lucrative chain of nursing homes and held high-ranking positions at our church. To the congregation, my mother was the ultimate matriarch, a woman of faith, grace, and impeccable style. To me, she was a harsh critic who viewed my dark skin and quiet independence as flaws. My father, the patriarch, was a man who deferred completely to my mother's vanity and spent his energy propping up my brother. Marcus Jr., who everyone called MJ, was the golden child. He was 35 and paraded around the city calling himself a tech entrepreneur. The reality was much darker. MJ had never built a successful company in his life. He funded his lavish lifestyle by constantly draining my parents' resources. But in their eyes, he was the African-American prince who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was expected to be the workhorse. They thought I was just a low-level data entry clerk in the medical field. I never corrected them. I let them believe I was barely scraping by because keeping my true success hidden was the only way to protect my peace. I was actually the founder and chief executive officer of a highly profitable healthcare compliance and audit corporation. On the night of their 40th wedding anniversary, my mother decided to throw an extravagant gala at their estate. She invited the mayor, several local politicians, and all the elite members of their social circle. But because she had secretly mismanaged the family funds to bail out MJ yet again, she could not afford a full catering staff. Instead of scaling back the party, she forced me to work. She made me wear a restrictive black uniform and told me to serve appetizers, completely disregarding that I was her daughter. I accepted the task silently. I was used to putting my head down and surviving their events. The ballroom was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over towering floral arrangements, and guests dressed in expensive evening gowns. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, providing the perfect soundtrack for the wealthy elite to mingle and gossip. I navigated through the crowd, carrying a heavy silver tray of hors d'oeuvres, trying to remain invisible while my feet throbbed in sensible black shoes. That was when my sister-in-law stepped into my path. Chloe was 30 years old, white, and married to MJ. She walked through life with an unwarranted sense of superiority and treated my family's home like her personal kingdom. Chloe had a vicious habit of targeting me with subtle racial microaggressions, constantly making passive-aggressive comments about my appearance and my supposed lack of ambition. She blocked my way near a massive ice sculpture holding a glass of champagne. Her eyes raked over my uniform, and a smug, condescending smile spread across her face. "Nia," she said loudly, ensuring the wealthy guests nearby could hear every word. "You really missed a massive spot on the buffet table. Honestly, I do not know why Beatrice lets you handle the food presentation. And your hair. It looks so unprofessional and unkempt for a formal event like this. Do not you own a straightener?" I took a deep, steadying breath. My natural hair was styled in an elegant protective updo that had taken hours to perfect. But to Chloe, anything that did not conform to her narrow standard of beauty was unacceptable. I kept my voice perfectly level, refusing to give her the reaction she desperately craved. I will let the catering manager know about the buffet table, Chloe. Excuse me. She rolled her eyes and leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a patronizing whisper. You know, if you actually applied yourself, maybe you would not be serving drinks at your brother's party. MJ is closing a huge funding round for his startup next week. You should ask him for a job. I hear his company needs people to answer phones and clean the offices. I forced a polite, empty smile. I am doing just fine with my career, thank you. I did not need her fake concern, and I certainly did not need a job from a man who was actively draining our parents' retirement accounts to fund his delusions of grandeur. My lack of shame clearly irritated her. Chloe glanced at the buffet table behind her and picked up a small appetizer plate. It was shrimp scampi swimming in a thick, buttery garlic and seafood sauce. Everyone in the family, including Chloe, knew I had a severe life-threatening allergy to shellfish. Even skin contact with a heavy seafood reduction could trigger a massive allergic reaction. We had discussed my allergy multiple times at family dinners. She took a deliberate bite of the shrimp, chewed slowly, and then intentionally knocked the rest of the plate directly against my tray. The heavy seafood sauce splashed all over my bare hands and soaked into the cuffs of my uniform shirt. Oops! Chloe laughed, a high and grating sound that pierced through the background music. My bad. You can just wash that off in the kitchen. It is not a big deal. Stop looking so sensitive. I stared at the sauce soaking into my skin, feeling an immediate, terrifying prickle of heat. Chloe, you know I am highly allergic to shellfish, I said, my voice trembling slightly as panic began to take root. She waved her hand dismissively and turned her back to me. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Nia. A little sauce is not going to kill you. Just go wash your hands and stop complaining. She walked back to her friends, laughing loudly about a vacation she and MJ were planning. I turned toward the kitchen doors, telling myself I just needed to wash my hands and find my medical bag. But I only made it 3 steps before the brutal reality of the allergic reaction hit my system. This was not just a mild rash or a simple itch. It was rapid onset anaphylaxis. My chest tightened instantly, feeling as though a heavy iron band was wrapping itself around my lungs and squeezing with tremendous force. My skin felt like it was quite literally on fire, breaking out in hot raised welts across my neck and arms. I tried to pull a breath of air into my lungs, but my airway was rapidly swelling shut. A high-pitched, terrifying wheezing sound escaped my lips instead of a breath. My vision began to blur, the sparkling chandeliers above me, smearing into chaotic streaks of bright yellow light. My hands went completely numb, and my fingers lost their grip on the heavy silver tray I was carrying. The tray crashed to the solid marble floor, shattering 24 crystal champagne glasses in a spectacular, shattering explosion of noise. The sharp sound echoed through the massive room, cutting through the conversations and the clinking of silverware. The live jazz music stopped abruptly. The lively chatter of the guests died instantly. The entire ballroom turned in unison to look at me. I dropped heavily to my knees, clawing desperately at my throat, begging my body for a single breath of air. The room was spinning violently. I looked up through tear-filled eyes, hoping beyond hope to see someone running to help me. Instead, the crowd parted and my mother marched toward me. Beatrice Washington looked absolutely furious. She did not look at my red, swollen face. She did not hear my desperate, ragged gasps for air. She only looked at the spilled champagne and the broken crystals scattered across her expensive imported rug. Nia, she hissed, her voice low and venomous, so the guests would not hear her true tone. What is wrong with you? Stop acting out for attention this instant. I reached a trembling hand up toward her, silently begging for her help. My lips mouthed the word medicine, trying desperately to tell her that I needed my emergency auto-injector from my locker in the staff room. I could not force any sound past my swollen vocal cords. My mother swatted my hand away with a look of pure disdain. Enough drama, she snapped, her eyes darting nervously around the room to see if the mayor or the church elders were watching us. You are embarrassing the family in front of the pastor. Get off the floor, get in the kitchen, and clean yourself up. You are ruining my anniversary party. My father, Marcus Sr., walked up to stand beside my mother. He looked down at me with an expression of pure exhaustion and disgust, exactly how he looked at me my entire life. He had never been a protector, only a willing enabler for my mother's worst impulses. Always so lazy, he sighed heavily, adjusting his expensive tuxedo jacket. She drops a tray and decides to take a nap on the floor. Get up, Nia. You are making a fool of yourself and disrespecting your mother. I was suffocating. My lungs were burning, screaming for oxygen that could not reach them. The edges of my vision were rapidly going black. I realized in that horrifying, crystal-clear moment that my parents would rather watch me die on their ballroom floor than admit there was an emergency that might disrupt their perfect social event. Their image was more important than my life. Then a strong voice cut through the nervous murmurs of the crowd. Move. Get out of the way. Someone pushed forcefully past my father, nearly knocking him off balance. It was Dr. Julian Hayes. Julian was MJ's childhood best friend, a brilliant and highly respected pulmonologist who had known our family for decades. Unlike my brother, Julian had actually earned his success through years of grueling medical training. He was grounded, deeply observant, and had always treated me with a quiet, lingering respect. Julian dropped to his knees beside me on the wet marble floor, completely ignoring the broken glass that bit into his expensive trousers. He took one look at my swollen face and the hives rapidly spreading across my neck. He pressed 2 fingers to my pulse, and I saw his handsome face drain of all color. She is in anaphylactic shock, Julian yelled, his voice echoing powerfully off the high ceilings and commanding the room. Call 911 right now. Her airway is completely closing. My mother gasped, but it was not out of concern for my failing life. Julian, please do not overreact, Beatrice said, stepping forward and trying to maintain her polished, authoritative tone. She is just having a panic attack. She does this sometimes when she wants attention from the family. Please do not call an ambulance with all these important people here. It will cause a massive scandal. Julian glared up at my mother with a look of absolute fury that I will never forget as long as I live. Are you out of your mind? He roared, his voice shaking with disbelief and professional anger. She is dying. He turned back to me urgently, pulling off his expensive suit jacket to prop it under my head. Hang on, Nia, he said gently. His eyes locked firmly onto mine, anchoring me to the world. Stay with me. I am right here. You are going to be okay. He shouted at the paralyzed crowd again. Who has an epinephrine injector? Someone find her bag immediately. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Church ladies shrieked in horror. Guests scrambled to find the catering manager to locate my belongings in the back rooms. Through the fading light of my consciousness, I saw Chloe standing at the very edge of the crowd. She looked slightly pale, but quickly turned to whisper something dismissive and defensive to MJ. My brother was just shaking his head, looking annoyed by the massive disruption I was causing to his networking opportunities. The last thing I remember before the suffocating darkness took me completely was the distant piercing wail of approaching sirens, and my mother loudly complaining to the catering manager that the paramedics better use the service entrance so they did not ruin her grand cake-cutting ceremony. The rhythmic, mechanical beeping of a heart monitor was the first sound that pierced through the heavy fog of my unconsciousness. I forced my eyes open. Blinding fluorescent lights assaulted my vision, followed instantly by the sterile chemical smell of an intensive care unit. My throat felt as though it had been scrubbed with crushed glass. Every breath was a labored, agonizing effort, but I was breathing. I was alive. I turned my head slowly against the stiff hospital pillow. The room was mostly dark, illuminated only by the glow of the medical equipment. Sitting in a plastic visitor chair beside my bed, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees, was Julian. He was still wearing the dress trousers from the anniversary party, but his expensive jacket was gone and his tie was pulled loose. He looked completely exhausted, his jaw tight with tension. When he saw my eyes open, he exhaled a sharp breath and immediately stood up, pressing the call button for the nurse. "You are awake," he said softly, stepping closer to the bed. His professional demeanor was firmly in place, but I could see the raw relief swimming in his dark eyes. "Do not try to speak yet. Your airway suffered severe trauma. You had a massive anaphylactic reaction. We had to administer multiple doses of epinephrine and put you on a ventilator for a few hours. They just extubated you." I reached up with a heavy bruised hand and touched the thick plastic identification bracelet wrapped around my wrist. My memory returned in sharp, fragmented flashes. The spilled seafood sauce, the terrifying inability to draw air into my lungs, the shatter of crystal glasses, my mother telling me to get up and go to the kitchen while I was actively dying on her expensive floor. I looked around the quiet, empty room, my gaze moving past Julian to the closed wooden door. "Where is my family?" I rasped, my voice sounding like dry leaves scraping across pavement. Julian closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, the anger I saw there was potent and absolute. "They are not here, Nia. I rode in the ambulance with you. I have been sitting in this chair for 14 hours. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. Not a single one of them came." Julian shook his head, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. "Your mother told the paramedics to use the service elevator so the flashing lights would not ruin the ambiance for the guests. As the ambulance was pulling out of the driveway, I saw them bringing out a 4-tier cake. They cut the cake, Nia. You were dying in the back of an ambulance and they stayed to take photographs and cut a vanilla cake." A single tear escaped the corner of my eye and slid down my cheek, soaking into the sterile pillowcase. I was not crying because I was surprised. I was crying because the absolute finality of their betrayal was staggering. "You look shocked, Dr. Hayes," I whispered, forcing the painful words past my damaged vocal cords. Julian pulled his chair closer to the bed. "I am disgusted. I have known MJ since we were kids playing basketball in the neighborhood. I knew your parents were strict, that they cared about their image in the community and the church. But leaving your own daughter to die so you can preserve a party aesthetic is a level of sickness I cannot comprehend." I let out a dry, humorless chuckle that ended in a painful cough. "You are looking at the reality of the golden child dynamic, Julian. In my mother's eyes, MJ is the brilliant heir who will carry on the Washington legacy. I am just the mule. The strong, independent black woman expected to endure everything, complain about nothing, and stay entirely in the background until they need someone to clean up their messes. They do not see me as a daughter. They see me as an appliance. And yesterday, the appliance malfunctioned at an inconvenient time." Julian stared at me, his medical professionalism giving way to genuine human empathy. "You almost died, Nia. If I had not had my medical bag in my car, if I had not recognized the symptoms." I know I interrupted quietly. "Thank you for saving my life. I mean that, but understand this. They will not apologize. When they finally show up, they will find a way to make this my fault." I was entirely correct. 24 hours passed. Julian checked in on me between his rounds, ensuring the nursing staff gave me top-tier care. Finally, at noon the following day, the heavy wooden door to my room swung open. Beatrice and Marcus Sr. strolled inside. They did not rush. They did not look frantic or relieved. They walked into the intensive care unit with the casual, irritated posture of people forced to wait too long at the Department of Motor Vehicles. My mother was holding a cardboard cup of lukewarm coffee, wearing her Sunday best, complete with a silk scarf and flawless makeup. My father trailed behind her, checking his expensive watch. "Look who finally decided to wake up," my mother said, her voice dripping with extreme annoyance. "Do you have any idea how difficult it was to find parking at this hospital? We had to park 3 blocks away and walk." My father stood at the foot of my bed, shaking his head. "You really caused a scene, Nia. We had to spend the last 2 days calling the mayor and the pastor to apologize for the disruption. MJ had important investors at that party. You completely ruined his networking opportunities with your little stunt. I stared at the two people who brought me into this world. I was hooked up to an intravenous line, my face was still visibly swollen, and my heart monitor was steadily beeping beside my head. I am sorry, my near-fatal allergic reaction interrupted MJ talking about his imaginary tech startup. I said, my voice cold and flat. My mother rolled her eyes and took a sip of her coffee. Do not take that tone with me. Chloe told us what happened. You were careless around the seafood buffet. You know you have allergies, yet you refuse to take accountability for your own clumsiness. You made Chloe feel terrible, by the way. She was just trying to help you clean up and you practically attacked her. The sheer audacity of the gaslighting was breathtaking. Chloe had intentionally contaminated my hands with a deadly allergen, and my mother had already rewritten the narrative to make the white daughter-in-law the victim of my supposed aggression. I just looked at Beatrice, feeling the last remaining threads of familial obligation snap and wither away completely. The daughter who desperately wanted their love officially died on that ballroom floor. The woman looking back at them now was someone they did not know at all. My mother reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of folded papers. She tossed them carelessly onto my lap. They landed with a heavy thud against the thin hospital blanket. I looked down at the prominent logo of the hospital billing department printed across the top page. We spoke to the financial office downstairs, my mother stated, crossing her arms over her chest. The insurance covers the bulk of this ridiculous emergency room visit, but the co-pays and the out-of-network ambulance fees are astronomical. We are not paying this, Nia. You need to call your little employer and figure out a payment plan. I stared at the paperwork. You want me to pay for the ambulance that saved my life after your daughter-in-law poisoned me? My father scoffed loudly. Stop using that word! Nobody poisoned you! You had an accident because you were not paying attention. And yes, you are paying the bill. Your brother is at a critical juncture with his new technology startup. He needs every ounce of family capital we have to secure his seed funding. We cannot drain our liquid assets just because you decided to take a joyride in an ambulance. Before I could even process the sheer cruelty of prioritizing a fake startup over my hospital bills, the heavy wooden door to my room swung open again. MJ and Chloe strolled in. MJ was wearing a tailored suit that I knew my parents had paid for, and Chloe was clutching a luxury handbag that cost more than most people made in a month. Neither of them looked at the heart monitor or the IV line taped to my bruised hand. Oh, good, you are awake, MJ said, sounding incredibly bored. Listen, we cannot stay long. I have a pitch meeting across town, but since you are going to be stuck in this bed resting for a while, we have a favor to ask. Chloe stepped forward, wrinkling her nose at the sterile smell of the intensive care unit. It is not even a favor, really. It just makes logical sense. MJ and I are having the hardwood floors refinished in our house. The fumes are going to be absolutely terrible for my skin. Since your apartment is just sitting there empty while you recover, we are going to crash there for the next 3 weeks. We just need your spare keys. I looked from Chloe to MJ, then to my parents. They all stood there, a united front of entitlement, waiting for me to hand over the keys to my sanctuary. They genuinely believed that while I was recovering from a near-death experience, I should surrender my home so Chloe would not have to smell wood stain. I took a slow, painful breath. The air scraped against my healing vocal cords, but when I spoke, my voice was absolute iron. No. The room went dead silent. MJ blinked, genuinely confused. What do you mean, no? It is just an apartment, Nia. Do not be petty. We need a place to stay. I said no, I repeated, locking eyes with my brother. You are not stepping foot in my home. Neither is your wife. You can take some of that family capital you are bleeding from our parents and book a hotel. Chloe gasped, clutching her pearls in a display of exaggerated shock. MJ, are you hearing this? She is being completely unreasonable. We are family. That was when my father erupted. Marcus Sr. stepped right up to the edge of my hospital bed, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed a trembling finger inches from my face. How dare you speak to your brother that way? He shouted, completely ignoring the nurses passing by in the hallway outside. After everything this family has done for you, your brother is out there trying to build a legacy. He is the definition of black male excellence. He is trying to elevate this family name, and you cannot even offer him a place to sleep for a few weeks. You are nothing but a selfish, bitter, jealous woman. My mother nodded enthusiastically in agreement. You have always been jealous of MJ, always trying to ruin his moments. You ruined his networking event yesterday, and now you are trying to stress him out before his big pitch meeting. You listened to me very carefully, Nia, my father snarled, leaning so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. You are going to hand over those keys right now, and you are going to apologize to Chloe. If you do not, you are done. Do you hear me? You will be cut off from this family. You will not come to Sunday dinners. You will not come to holidays. You will have no mother, no father, and no brother. You will be completely on your own. They waited for me to break. They waited for the tears, for the apologies, for the desperate scrambling to stay in their good graces. They had used this exact threat 100 times before to keep me in line, dangling their conditional love like a carrot just out of reach. I looked at my father's red, angry face. I looked at my mother's haughty, judgmental posture. I looked at MJ's smug entitlement and Chloe's arrogant sneer. I felt the familiar weight of their expectations, the crushing, suffocating burden of being the family mule. And then I felt it lift completely. I looked my father dead in the eyes, and I gave him a single definitive nod. Okay. My father blinked, thrown off balance. What do you mean, okay? I mean, I accept your terms, I said, my voice eerily calm. I am cut off. We are done. Now get out of my hospital room before I call security. My mother let out an offended gasp. You cannot be serious. You are choosing to abandon your family over an apartment. I am choosing to survive, I said flatly. Get out. MJ scoffed, grabbing Chloe's arm. Whatever. Let her rot here. She will be calling us begging for money the second she realizes how expensive that bill is. Come on, Chloe, we have better places to be. My father glared at me one last time, a look of absolute disgust. Do not bother calling us when you finally fail, Nia. They marched out of the intensive care unit in a single file line, their heads held high, completely convinced they had just punished me. They left the hospital billing paperwork sitting on my lap. They had no idea that they had just handed me the greatest gift of my life. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them, sealing the end of my toxic family dynamic. I sat alone in the quiet hospital room, listening to the steady beep of my heart monitor. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up the billing paperwork, tossed it onto the bedside table, and reached for my personal cell phone. I unlocked the screen and scrolled to my emergency contacts. I pressed the call button for my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring. Good morning, CEO Washington. I hope you are recovering well, he said professionally. I am doing much better, I rasped. It is time to initiate phase 2 of our acquisition strategy. Begin the hostile debt buyout of the Washington nursing home chain immediately. Do not buy the company. Buy every single loan they have with the bank. I want to own their debt by Friday. 1 week later, the automatic glass doors of the Apex Audit skyscraper slid open, welcoming me into the pristine marble-floored lobby. My high heels clicked sharply against the polished stone, creating a rhythmic cadence of pure, unadulterated authority. I was no longer the suffocating, helpless girl fighting for air on a ballroom floor, nor was I the discarded daughter lying alone in an intensive care unit. I wore a tailored crimson power suit that commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. As I bypassed the long lines at the security desk and walked directly toward the private executive elevator, my personal cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message in the family group chat from my mother, Beatrice. It read, MJ has a very important investor meeting tomorrow. I expect you to come over and iron his suits tonight. Do not be late. I did not even break my stride. I swiped the notification away and stepped into the elevator. Good morning, Chief Executive Officer Washington. The head receptionist smiled, handing me my usual black coffee. Good morning, Sarah, I replied, accepting the cup. The elevator shot up to the 42nd floor. When the silver doors parted, the true scale of my secret life was on full display. Dozens of highly paid financial analysts, compliance officers, and forensic accountants bustled through the massive open concept office space. Huge digital displays mounted on the glass walls tracked healthcare market trends and real-time audit statuses for hospital networks across the entire country. For 32 years, my family firmly believed I was a glorified secretary, a low-level data entry clerk, barely scraping by on minimum wage. I had deliberately let them believe that fiction because it was the ultimate camouflage. While my brother MJ was constantly begging our parents for seed money to fund fake technology startups that never materialized, I had quietly built Apex Audit from the ground up. I had identified a massive, highly profitable gap in the healthcare compliance market, secured independent venture capital, and grown the firm into a corporate powerhouse. I did not enter data for a living. I owned the company that audited the hospitals. I walked into my expansive corner office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. My vice president of acquisitions, David, was already sitting at the long mahogany conference table. He had a thick red folder waiting for me. "Good morning, Nia," David said, adjusting his glasses and opening his laptop. "The preliminary forensic audit on the target acquisition is complete. It is exactly as messy as you predicted it would be." I sat down at the head of the table, opening the red folder. "Walk me through the carnage, David. Do not leave out a single detail." David tapped his pen against the printed financial spreadsheets. Washington Senior Care is hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate. On paper, it looks like a respectable, highly profitable chain of 6 boutique nursing homes. But internally, the financial structure is a complete and total disaster. The owner, Beatrice Washington, has been actively seeking a corporate buyout from us for the last 6 months. She is absolutely desperate for Apex to acquire them to avoid a total financial collapse. I looked down at the documents. There, printed in black ink, was my mother's signature on the desperate acquisition requests. She had been emailing my corporate acquisitions department for half a year, practically begging Apex Audit for a financial lifeline. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the anonymous chief executive officer she was pleading with was the exact same daughter she had just told to get into the kitchen and clean up a spill. "What is driving the insolvency?" I asked, scanning the balance sheets. "The revenue from the long-term patients is substantial. The government subsidies are clearing. Where is all the money going?" David flipped to the third tab in the extensive dossier. Embezzlement, plain and simple. Massive, unchecked corporate bleeding. There are continuous 6-figure withdrawals labeled as executive consulting fees, but these fees are not going to consultants. They are being routed directly into a private shell company called MJ Innovations. I leaned back in my leather chair, a cold, hard smile touching my lips. MJ Innovations, my brother's imaginary tech startup. My mother was illegally siphoning Medicare funds and resident care budgets to finance MJ's luxury sports cars, Chloe's designer shopping sprees, and his pathetic facade of blackmail excellence. This was not just poor business management, it was blatant federal fraud. They are severely delinquent on their primary commercial loans. David continued, entirely unaware of my deep personal connection to the names printed on the paper. "The bank is preparing to initiate foreclosure on all 6 nursing home properties, plus the primary collateral." I raised an eyebrow, folding my hands together on the desk. The primary collateral. What exactly did Beatrice put up to secure that last line of credit? David pointed to a highlighted paragraph at the bottom of the page. "The family estate. The mansion in Buckhead. If they default on these loans, the bank seizes the business and their personal home. That is exactly why they are begging Apex for a buyout. They need our capital to cover the stolen money before the federal auditors notice the missing Medicare funds and send them all to federal prison." I closed the red folder and slid it slowly back across the smooth mahogany table. "David, we are not going to acquire Washington Senior Care. Buying the company means assuming their immense legal liability, and I have absolutely no intention of cleaning up Beatrice Washington's fraudulent mess." David looked genuinely confused. Then why did you have me expedite the forensic audit? If we are not buying the company, what is our angle here? I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city traffic flowing far below. I do not want the company, David. I want the debt. Contact their primary lender immediately. Apex Audit is going to purchase the entirety of Washington Senior Care's commercial debt portfolio from the bank. We will pay a premium to acquire the loans today in cash. David's eyes widened as the aggressive corporate strategy clicked into place. He realized exactly what I was doing. You do not want to be their partner, he said quietly, a note of awe in his voice. You want to be their sole creditor. Exactly, I replied, not turning away from the window. If we buy the company, Beatrice gets a golden parachute and walks away rich. If we buy the debt, Apex holds the absolute power of foreclosure over every single asset they possess. I want to own the paper on their business. I want to own the paper on their mansion. Execute the debt purchase by close of business today, David. Do whatever it takes. Consider it done, CEO Washington. David replied, closing his laptop with a sharp snap. I stood by the glass watching the city move below me. My family thought they had successfully discarded me in that hospital room. They thought cutting me off was the ultimate punishment. They were about to learn that you cannot cut off the very person who owns the ground you stand on. The rest of the afternoon moved with the swift, ruthless precision of a corporate execution. Within an hour of my conversation with David, my entire executive team was assembled in the main boardroom. The space was a fortress of glass and steel, soundproofed and secure. At the center of the massive digital display screen was the complete, unvarnished truth of the Washington family empire. The lead forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Elena, stood at the head of the table walking us through the exact mechanism of my family's financial rot. It was far worse than a few mismanaged accounts. The numbers told a story of blatant, arrogant theft. Elena brought up the billing ledgers for the 6 nursing home facilities. She pointed to a series of recurring payments made to a vendor listed as MJ Innovations. According to the corporate filings, this vendor was supposed to be supplying state-of-the-art respiratory equipment and specialized medical software to the elderly residents. None of that equipment actually exists, Elena stated, her laser pointer resting on a staggering 7-figure sum. We cross-referenced the supply manifests with the actual inventory at the facilities. They are billing the federal government through Medicare for life-saving medical devices and then routing the cash directly into this ghost company. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over me. While I was suffocating on my parents' ballroom floor, desperately needing oxygen, my brother was stealing money meant for respiratory equipment to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. Elena clicked to the next slide, projecting the expense reports for MJ Innovations. The stolen Medicare funds were not even being hidden well. The money was bleeding directly into luxury purchases. I saw bank transfers for a brand new customized Mercedes G-Wagon registered to Chloe. I saw receipts for first-class flights to Tulum, high-end designer handbags, and massive down payments on commercial retail spaces for tech startups that never launched. My brother, the so-called definition of blackmail excellence, was nothing but a common thief stealing from vulnerable senior citizens to keep his white wife dripping in diamonds. The legal counsel for Apex Audit, a seasoned corporate lawyer named Robert, spoke up from the end of the table. The exposure here is catastrophic, CEO Washington. The Department of Justice does not play around with Medicare fraud. The federal government is already implementing new algorithms to catch exactly this type of vendor embezzlement. If the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services initiate an audit, the entire Washington family organization will collapse overnight. I folded my hands on the cool mahogany table, keeping my expression completely neutral. Who is legally liable, Robert? Who takes the fall when the federal agents knock on the door? Robert pulled up the corporate registry documents. That is the most interesting part of this entire mess. Marcus Jr. is not listed anywhere on the official executive board of Washington Senior Care. His name is completely insulated. The sole signatories on every single fraudulent Medicare claim and every defaulted commercial loan are Beatrice and Marcus Sr. A heavy silence fell over the boardroom. My executive team looked at the documents with professional detachment, unaware of the deep personal connection I had to the names on the screen. But my mind was racing. MJ had manipulated our parents perfectly. He had convinced them to funnel millions of dollars into his accounts, and he had set them up to take the absolute entirety of the federal prison sentence. My parents were so blinded by their worship of the Golden Child that they had literally signed their own arrest warrants to keep him happy. "They know the walls are closing in," David said, sliding a printed email across the table to me. "Beatrice Washington sent this to our acquisitions portal 2 hours ago. She marked it as urgent." I picked up the paper. The email was addressed to the esteemed Chief Executive Officer of Apex Audit. The tone was completely unrecognizable from the harsh, venomous woman who had kicked me out of her hospital room. Beatrice was groveling. She wrote eloquently about her family's legacy of Black excellence in the Atlanta community, begging for an expedited buyout. She claimed they were looking for a strong corporate partner to take the business to the next level. It was a masterpiece of desperate manipulation. She needed Apex to buy the company, inject massive amounts of cash, and cover up the missing millions before the government auditors arrived. "She thinks she is negotiating from a position of power," I said softly, my voice echoing in the quiet boardroom. "She thinks she can charm a faceless corporation into saving her from federal prison." I looked up at my team. "We are not acquiring Washington Senior Care. If we buy the entity, we absorb the legal liability for the Medicare fraud, and I will not expose Apex Audit to federal scrutiny to save these people from their own greed." "David, what is the status of the debt purchase from their primary lender?" David smiled a sharp, predatory expression. "The bank was absolutely thrilled to hear from us. They know the Washington commercial loans are highly toxic. They were preparing to initiate the foreclosure process next week. They agreed to sell us the entirety of the debt portfolio at a slight discount just to get it off their books. We are purchasing the commercial mortgages on all 6 nursing home facilities, the equipment loans, and the primary collateral." "And the primary collateral is the family estate," I confirmed, making sure the trap was perfectly set. "Yes," David nodded. "The mansion in Buckhead. We will hold the deed in escrow. The wire transfer is prepped and waiting for your final authorization." "Bring me the authorization forms," I commanded. Robert slid the heavy stack of legal documents across the table along with a gold fountain pen. I looked down at the paperwork. This was the exact moment the balance of power shifted forever. For 32 years, my parents had used their wealth and their home as a weapon to demand my compliance. They had threatened to cut me off, to leave me homeless, to erase me from the family if I did not bow down to my brother and his arrogant wife. They thought their money made them untouchable. I uncapped the fountain pen. With 3 swift, deliberate strokes, I signed my name to the wire transfer authorizing the deployment of millions of dollars from Apex's capital reserves. I signed the transfer of the deed liens. I signed the assumption of the commercial mortgages. It was done. I set the pen down. "The transaction is complete," David confirmed, checking his tablet as the banking confirmation chimed. "Apex Audit is now the sole creditor for the Washington family. They owe the bank nothing. They owe you everything." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of absolute control. I did not want to send them to federal prison immediately. That would be too fast. A quick arrest would allow Beatrice to play the victim to her church congregation, to claim she was unfairly targeted by the government. No, I wanted them to feel the slow, suffocating squeeze of total financial ruin. I wanted them to wake up every single day knowing their perfect facade was crumbling. I wanted them to realize that the daughter they had discarded like trash was the only person holding the keys to their entire existence. The trap was locked, and I was going to enjoy watching them walk blindly into it. 2 days later, the trap snapped shut. The notification chimed on my secure desktop console. The front desk receptionist sent a priority message confirming that Marcus Washington Jr. and his wife Chloe had just walked into the lobby of Apex Audit. They were here for a 2 o'clock venture capital pitch meeting. My brother was desperately trying to secure legitimate funding for MJ Innovations to cover the gaping financial holes he had torn in our parents' nursing home empire. He had absolutely no idea that the anonymous corporate entity he was pitching to was fully owned by the sister he had left to die. I pressed the intercom button. Send them up to the 42nd floor, I instructed the lobby desk. Put them in the executive glass suite. Give them the absolute highest tier of VIP treatment. Serve them the imported sparkling water. Let them feel incredibly important. I wanted my brother's ego inflated to the absolute maximum capacity before we drove a needle right through it. My vice president of acquisitions, David, stood beside my desk. We both turned our attention to the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on my office wall. The live feed from the high-definition security cameras in the VIP waiting room flickered onto the screen. High-quality audio piped through the surround sound speakers. I watched as MJ and Chloe strutted into the luxurious glass-walled conference room. MJ was wearing a bespoke navy suit, practically vibrating with unearned confidence. Chloe trailed behind him, clutching her crocodile skin handbag, her nose wrinkled in perpetual distaste. I cannot believe this much capital is sitting in this part of town, Chloe complained loudly, her voice echoing perfectly through the hidden microphones. She aggressively wiped down the pristine leather chair with a wet wipe before sitting. The drive over here was so ghetto, MJ. Did you see those people loitering at the bus stop on the corner? I swear one of them looked right at my car. You better make sure the valet parked the Mercedes in a secure garage. I do not want those kind of people anywhere near my vehicle. MJ chuckled, leaning back in his chair and crossing his ankles on top of the polished mahogany table. Relax, babe. We will be out of this neighborhood in an hour. Once I secure this seed money from Apex, we are flying straight to the Bahamas. These corporate venture capitalists eat up the whole blackmail tech founder narrative. I just have to throw a few buzzwords at them, show them the pitch deck, and walk out with a check. They are desperate for diversity investments. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. My brother was not just a thief. He was a complete fraud, playing into the very stereotypes our ancestors fought against, using diversity as a cheap marketing trick to fund his criminal lifestyle. And his wife was sitting in a building owned by a black woman, drinking free water while casually spewing racist microaggressions about the local community. It is time, David, I said, not taking my eyes off the monitor. Go in there and end him. Do it fast. I want to see the exact moment his delusion breaks. David nodded, grabbing a single legal pad, and walked out of my office. A minute later, I watched on the screen as David opened the glass door to the VIP suite. MJ immediately jumped up, flashing a brilliant, completely fake smile, extending his hand. David, great to meet you, man, MJ said smoothly, turning on his practiced charm. I am Marcus Washington Jr., founder and Chief Executive Officer of MJ Innovations. This is my Chief Marketing Officer, Chloe. We are really excited to show Apex Audit how we are disrupting the healthcare technology space. David did not shake my brother's hand. He simply walked past him, sat down at the opposite side of the table, and placed his legal pad down. MJ awkwardly lowered his hand, a brief flash of irritation crossing his face, before he sat back down and slid a glossy, heavy pitch deck across the table. David opened the folder. He flipped the first page. He flipped the second page. He did not read the marketing copy. He went straight to the financial projections. The silence in the room stretched out for exactly 3 minutes. MJ bounced his knee nervously. Chloe checked her reflection in her phone screen. Finally, David closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. Apex Audit is passing on this investment opportunity. David stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. The meeting is over. You can validate your parking with the receptionist on the ground floor. MJ stared at him, completely stunned. Wait, what? You did not even look at the technology module. We are revolutionizing respiratory care tracking. We have a guaranteed pipeline of government contracts lined up. You have absolutely nothing, David countered, leaning forward slightly. These financial projections are entirely fabricated. You list continuous revenue streams from Medicare contracts that your limited liability company does not legally possess. You list asset valuations based on nursing home equipment that does not physically exist. This is not a technology startup, Mr. Washington. This is a poorly disguised shell company. Presenting these falsified documents to a corporate entity for funding, constitutes wire fraud. Chloe gasped, her face draining of color. Excuse me. How dare you speak to my husband that way? Do you know who his family is? They run the most successful senior care facilities in this state. David stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. I know exactly who your family is, and I strongly suggest you use the exit before I have security escort you out for trespassing. MJ lost his mind. The golden child completely stripped of his unearned validation threw a spectacular tantrum. He slammed his fists onto the mahogany table, knocking over his glass of imported water. You arrogant suit, MJ screamed, his voice cracking with rage. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I am bringing millions of dollars of business to this firm and you are throwing it away. I want to speak to the CEO. I demand to speak to the CEO right now. He will fire you on the spot. David looked at my brother with absolute pity. The CEO is entirely unavailable to people like you. Have a terrible afternoon. David walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. I watched the monitor as two large security guards immediately stepped into the doorway, gesturing toward the elevators. Let us go, folks, the lead guard commanded. The live feed captured every humiliating second. MJ grabbed his useless pitch deck, his face flushed dark purple with embarrassment and fury. Chloe scurried behind him, trying to hide her face behind her designer handbag, as the security guards marched them directly onto the elevator down 42 floors and paraded them straight through the crowded main lobby. I switched the camera feed to the ground floor. I watched my 35-year-old brother kick a decorative lobby planter in a blind rage before being forcefully shoved out the revolving glass doors and onto the hot Atlanta pavement. The golden child was cracking, and I was going to break him completely. My private desk phone buzzed, breaking the silence in my office. It was a direct line, a number I only gave to a select few. I picked up the receiver. It was Dr. Julian Hayes. His voice was deep, steady, and completely devoid of the casual banter we used to share when we were younger. He did not ask how my day was. He simply told me we needed to meet in person immediately. He named an exclusive, dimly lit steakhouse on the north side of the city, far away from the social circles my parents frequented. I agreed and told David I was leaving for the day. 2 hours later, I walked into the restaurant. Julian was already seated at a secluded corner booth. He wore a dark turtleneck and a tailored blazer, looking every bit the successful physician, but the exhaustion around his eyes betrayed a heavy burden. I slid into the booth across from him. He ordered us both a drink before placing a thick encrypted flash drive on the center of the dark wooden table. It sat between us like a loaded weapon. I have spent the last 48 hours doing something I should have done months ago. Julian began, keeping his voice low so the surrounding tables could not hear. I am the primary consulting pulmonologist for 3 of your mother's nursing home facilities. I sign the medical necessity authorizations for the elderly residents who need advanced respiratory support. Oxygen concentrators, high-end nebulizers, continuous positive airway pressure machines. These are vulnerable people, Nia. Some of them are our own elders from the community people who built this city. I looked at the flash drive, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. And the equipment never arrived, I stated, already knowing the answer. Julian leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. Never. My patients are struggling to breathe. The nursing staff keeps telling me the supplier is backordered. But I accessed the billing portals yesterday. The federal government has been paying for that equipment for over a year. The supplier listed on every single invoice is MJ Innovations. I confronted the facility administrators this morning and they stonewalled me. They said your mother personally handles all vendor relations and told them not to ask questions. Julian ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure, unadulterated frustration. Your brother is literally stealing the breath from dying people to buy sports cars, Nia. And your parents are signing the checks. I am going to the federal authorities. I have to report this. But before I did, I needed to look you in the eye and warn you, because when the federal indictments come down, your family is going to be destroyed. I reached across the table and placed my hand firmly over the flash drive. Julian watched my face, searching for shock, for tears, for the typical reaction of a daughter realizing her family was facing federal prison. He found absolutely none of those things. Instead, I calmly picked up the drive and dropped it into my designer purse. "You do not need to go to the federal authorities, Julian," I said softly. "I already have their complete forensic financial portfolio. I know exactly how much they stole. I know exactly where they hid it. And as of 3 hours ago, I own every single dollar of their commercial debt." Julian froze. He stared at me, his medical brain rapidly processing the information. He looked at my tailored crimson suit, the undeniable confidence in my posture, the absolute lack of panic in my voice. He pieced together the puzzle of the quiet, supposedly struggling sister who never asked for a dime, who tolerated the abuse with a chilling, calculated patience. "Who exactly do you work for?" Nia Julian asked, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I do not work for anyone," I replied, picking up my glass of water and taking a slow sip. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Audit, the corporate entity your mother has been begging for a bailout." Julian sat back in his booth as the sheer magnitude of my checkmate hit him. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his handsome face. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "The golden child thinks he is a genius, and he is playing with pennies. While you, the scapegoat, own the entire bank. You are dismantling their toxic empire brick by brick from the inside out." "I am not dismantling it," I corrected him smoothly. "I am executing a legally binding liquidation. They dug their own graves, Julian. I am just the one holding the shovel. But I need this compliance data you brought me. This proves that Beatrice and Marcus Sr. had direct, unquestionable knowledge that the medical equipment was never delivered. It destroys their plausible deniability. It proves they were not just fooled by MJ, but active, willing participants in the fraud." Julian reached across the table. This time, he did not reach for the flash drive. He gently took my hand. His skin was warm, his grip steady and protective. The professional tension between us melted away, replaced by a profound, crackling mutual respect. "I am so sorry I did not see it sooner, Nia," he said, his voice thick with genuine regret. "I grew up in their house. I ate at their Sunday dinners. I watched them praise MJ to the heavens while they treated you like an afterthought. I thought they were just strict. I never realized the depth of their cruelty until I watched your mother tell you to clean a floor while you were dying. You survived a nightmare entirely on your own." I looked down at our joined hands, feeling a strange, unfamiliar warmth bloom in my chest. I had fought this war in the dark for so long. I was so used to wearing armor, to bracing for the next insult, the next demand, the next betrayal. Having someone look at me not as a tool, not as an embarrassment, but as a brilliant, resilient woman was completely disarming. "You do not have to fight them alone anymore," Julian continued, his thumb gently tracing the back of my hand. "When you drop this hammer, when you finally show them exactly who you are and what they have done, the fallout is going to be biblical. They are going to scream, they are going to lie, and they are going to try to tear you down to save themselves. But I am going to be standing right there next to you, I promise you that." I looked up into his eyes, seeing the unwavering loyalty of a man who valued truth and justice above the toxic loyalty of a corrupt community. For the first time in my 32 years of life, I did not feel like the discarded daughter. I felt like a queen preparing to claim her throne. "Thank you, Julian," I whispered. He smiled, raising his glass to mine. "Do not thank me yet, CEO Washington. We have an empire to burn." The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, casting long, sharp shadows across the mahogany desk. The legal execution of the debt acquisition had been officially finalized at exactly 8 in the morning. I held the certified digital copies of the Washington Senior Care commercial mortgages in my secure server. I was no longer just a daughter. I was the supreme financial architect of their impending destruction. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, relishing the absolute quiet of my sanctuary. Then my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the polished wood of my desk. It did not just ring once. It buzzed in a relentless, frantic rhythm that meant only one thing. The Washington Family Legacy group chat was highly active. This was a massive text thread that included my parents, MJ, Chloe, several influential church elders, and a handful of gossiping aunties who thrived on my mother's performative updates. For years, I had kept the chat on silent acting as a passive ghost while I watched Beatrice and Marcus Sr. curate their flawless, deeply fraudulent social media image. Today, however, I picked up the phone. I knew exactly what was triggering the digital avalanche. The first message was a massive, sprawling paragraph from my mother. It was heavily decorated with praying hands and sparkling star emojis. "Praise the Lord, for he is good." Beatrice wrote, her digital voice oozing with a sickening level of false humility. "I am so overwhelmed with gratitude to announce that our family business has just secured a monumental, groundbreaking corporate partnership. A massive anonymous corporate conglomerate has stepped in to pay off our outstanding debts and restructure our enterprise. They saw the vision. They saw the legacy of Black excellence we have built in Atlanta. God has truly rewarded our tireless, honest hard work." I read the words and let out a dry, humorless laugh. Honest hard work. My mother had stolen millions of dollars from vulnerable senior citizens, faced federal prison, and was now actively attributing her 11th hour bailout to divine intervention. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the anonymous conglomerate was the very daughter she had discarded like trash. The group chat immediately exploded with sycophantic validation. Aunt Martha sent a flurry of hallelujah emojis. Pastor Thomas typed a long message about how the Washington family was a shining beacon of righteousness in the community. Then MJ chimed in, practically breaking his own arm to pat himself on the back. "It is all about the pitch," MJ typed, tossing in his usual hollow tech jargon. "I told you guys my networking strategies would pay off." The executives at this conglomerate took one look at the MJ Innovations business model and realized they had to invest in our infrastructure. "This is just the beginning. We are taking the Washington Empire global." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching at his sheer audacity. My brother had been physically thrown out of my lobby by security guards just days prior. His pitch deck had been openly mocked by my vice president for being a blatant instrument of wire fraud. Yet here he was, spinning his humiliating ejection into a narrative of corporate triumph. He was actively taking credit for a multi-million-dollar financial transaction that was designed exclusively to ruin him. Chloe could not resist joining the victory lap. She uploaded a high-resolution photograph of her wrist heavily weighed down by a brand-new, blindingly expensive diamond tennis bracelet. "Celebrating my amazing, brilliant husband today," Chloe wrote. "We are currently looking at summer homes in Martha's Vineyard to celebrate the buyout. It is so exhausting being the successful, but somebody has to do it." I took a screenshot of Chloe's photo and forwarded it directly to Elena, my lead forensic accountant, with a simple instruction attached. "Add this jewelry purchase to the embezzlement ledger. The federal authorities will need the receipt." My phone buzzed again. Beatrice was commanding the digital floor once more. This called for an immediate lavish display of their newly invented wealth. To celebrate this historic family milestone, Beatrice announced Marcus Sr. and I are hosting an exclusive victory gala this Saturday night at the Oak Ridge Country Club. "We have rented the grand ballroom. We want our entire church family and all our closest friends to witness what the Lord has done for us. It will be a catered black tie affair. Bring your best because the Washingtons are back on top." The aunties and church members flooded the chat with RSVP confirmations praising Beatrice for her generosity and unyielding faith. The echo chamber of toxic validation was deafening. They were preparing to throw a massive, incredibly expensive party using phantom money they did not actually possess, celebrating a corporate rescue that was actually a financial guillotine. I sat back in my leather chair and waited. I knew my mother could not resist the urge to twist the knife. She had an audience of dozens of people in this chat. She needed to assert her dominance. She needed to make sure everyone remembered the hierarchy. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up with a direct tag. Beatrice had explicitly mentioned my name so every single person in the group chat would be notified. Nia, my mother, wrote her text dripping with calculated venomous condescension. You are allowed to come to the country club this time, but do not embarrass us like you did at the anniversary party. Since you ruined my last event with your little medical stunt, you can redeem yourself on Saturday. Wear a plain black outfit so you can blend in with the catering staff. If the actual servers get overwhelmed, we might need extra hands to bus the tables and clear the dirty plates. Stay out of the professional photographs. I read the message twice. The cruelty was so precise, so deeply ingrained in her character, that it was almost breathtaking. She was publicly inviting me to her victory party, purely to degrade me in front of our entire extended family and social circle. She wanted to parade her golden child's imaginary success while forcing her dark-skinned, supposedly uneducated daughter to collect dirty napkins in the background. I did not cry. I did not feel the familiar crushing weight of inadequacy that used to paralyze me when I was younger. I did not feel the desperate clawing need to defend myself or explain my worth to people who were utterly determined to misunderstand me. Instead, I felt the icy, absolute calm of an apex predator watching its prey enthusiastically lock itself inside a cage. They had just given me the perfect stage. They had rented a grand ballroom, invited every single person whose opinion they valued, and handed me the microphone. They were going to throw a party to celebrate their wealth, and I was going to turn it into their financial funeral. I picked up my phone. I did not write a paragraph defending my career. I did not demand an apology for the blatant disrespect. I did not remind her that I had nearly died the last time she told me to get into a kitchen. I tapped the keyboard with slow, deliberate precision. I typed exactly 3 words, ensuring my response was visible to every aunt, uncle, church elder, and lying family member in the chat. I will be there. I set the phone face down on my polished mahogany desk. The digital trap was officially set. I looked up at Robert, my lead corporate attorney, who was standing quietly by the door holding a thick combination-locked briefcase. He walked forward and placed a massive stack of heavily tabbed legal documents directly in the center of my desk. The paperwork was dense, complex, and absolutely merciless. We spent the next 4 solid hours dissecting every single clause, ensuring there was not a single loophole my parents could exploit. Robert walked me through the exact timeline of the execution. We had the formal notices of default for all commercial mortgages tied to Washington Senior Care. We had the asset liquidation mandates for the 6 nursing home facilities. Most importantly, we had the 48-hour eviction notice for the family mansion in Buckhead. My parents had violated the covenants of their loans months ago by routing the capital to my brother. As their newly minted sole creditor, I had the immediate legal right to call in the debts in full. Because they lacked the liquid capital to pay, the foreclosure was automatic. There was no grace period. There was no negotiation. I signed each document with methodical precision, legally sealing the fate of the Washington Empire. My signature slashed across the bottom line of the final page, officially transferring the power they had wielded over me for 3 decades directly into my hands. The next afternoon, I left the Apex Audit skyscraper and drove to an exclusive invite-only boutique in the city's luxury shopping district. Beatrice had explicitly demanded I wear plain black to blend in with the catering staff. She wanted me invisible, a shadowy servant meant to collect dirty plates while my brother soaked in the applause of the Atlanta elite. I had absolutely no intention of blending in. My personal stylist had the VIP fitting room prepared before I even walked through the heavy glass doors. I bypassed the standard racks and went straight to the custom pieces reserved for top-tier clients. I selected a custom-tailored razor-sharp designer suit in a brilliant, blinding shade of optic white. It was a masterpiece of modern tailoring, featuring strong shoulders, a cinched waist, and wide-legged trousers that fell perfectly over a pair of imported crimson stiletto heels. The color was highly deliberate. It was the exact opposite of a catering uniform. It was an outfit designed to take up maximum space, to catch every single spotlight in the ballroom, and to force every eye in the room to look directly at me. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirrors, watching the seamstress make the final minute adjustments to the hem. For my entire life, I had shrunk myself to fit into the tiny, insignificant box my family had constructed for me. I had worn bland colors, kept my head down, and swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I was done shrinking. I was shedding the skin of the family mule. The woman reflecting back at me in the boutique mirror was an untouchable corporate executive preparing for war. Friday evening, the night before the Victory Gala. The sprawling city lights of Atlanta glittered through the windows of my luxury penthouse apartment. The heavy marble island in my kitchen had been repurposed into a tactical war room. Julian arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, bypassing small talk as he walked through my front door, carrying a sleek black leather portfolio. He did not bring flowers or wine. He brought the final devastating pieces of the execution. He unpacked the printed Medicare compliance reports and the inventory manifests, showing the phantom medical equipment my brother had billed to the government. We spread the documents out across the marble counter, aligning them perfectly with the asset liquidation papers and the foreclosure notices Robert had finalized the day before. Julian leaned over the table, his dark eyes scanning the overwhelming mountain of financial evidence. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy electric current of anticipation mixed with profound gravity. "You really have every single angle covered," Julian said, his voice quiet but filled with deep respect. "They have absolutely no exit strategy." I traced my finger over the official foreclosure notice for the mansion. "That is the entire point, Julian. Tomorrow night is not going to be a messy family argument. It is going to be a surgical, corporate slaughter." I looked up, meeting his intense gaze. I know exactly how my mother operates. When she feels cornered, she escalates. She will cry, she will scream, she will invoke the church, and she will try to manipulate the audience by painting me as a jealous, bitter daughter, trying to ruin her brother's special night. We cannot let her control the narrative with emotional chaos. Julian nodded slowly, understanding exactly what I meant. "So what is the operational protocol?" "No yelling." I stated, my voice dropping to a cold clinical register. "No shouting matches. No defending our character to the crowd. When MJ throws a tantrum, we do not engage. When Chloe tries to insult us, we do not react. We do not give them a single ounce of emotional fuel to use against us. We present nothing but cold, hard legal facts. We let the paperwork do the screaming for us." Julian leaned closer, a fierce, protective determination shining in his eyes. He reached across the marble island and firmly grasped my hand. "I have your back, Nia. I will handle MJ if he tries to get physical or out of line. You just focus your energy on delivering the kill shot." We stood there in the quiet penthouse, our hands joined over the legal instruments of my family's destruction. The spark of connection between us was undeniable, forged in the fires of mutual respect and the shared pursuit of absolute justice. He did not see me as damaged or aggressive. He saw my strength, and he chose to stand right beside it. I looked down at the eviction notices and the fraud reports, my pulse steady and calm. I was finally ready to burn their flawless facade to the ground. The Oak Ridge Country Club Grand Ballroom was a monument to manufactured wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden light over the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta elite society. My mother had spared absolutely no expense, using money she did not actually possess to throw the ultimate victory parade. Waitstaff in crisp tuxedo vests circulated with silver trays of imported champagne and expensive caviar. A 12-piece jazz orchestra played on a raised stage, providing the perfect sophisticated soundtrack for the wealthy elite to mingle and gossip. The room was packed with the very people Beatrice and Marcus Sr. spent their entire lives trying to impress. Pastor Thomas from our megachurch was holding court near a massive gleaming ice sculpture. The city mayor was shaking hands by the premium open bar. It was a flawless, masterfully curated facade of the perfect, affluent African-American family. To everyone in that room, the Washingtons were untouchable titans of industry. To me, they were just criminals dancing on a trapdoor. The heavy brass doors of the ballroom swung open. I did not slip in through the side entrance. I did not use the service corridor as my mother had explicitly demanded in her group chat message. I walked straight through the main double doors with Julian Hayes right by my side. The optic white of my custom-tailored suit cut through the sea of dark evening gowns and black tuxedos like a lightning strike. The effect was immediate and completely paralyzing. I did not look like a catering assistant stepping in to clear dirty plates. I looked like the owner of the building. The low hum of polite conversation began to falter. The church aunties who had been gossiping near the extravagant floral arrangements stopped mid-sentence. Eyes darted toward us. I could see the whisper network activating in real time as church elders nudged each other, pointing at the discarded daughter who had suddenly appeared looking like absolute royalty. Julian placed a warm, steady hand on the small of my back, projecting an aura of quiet, devastating power. We commanded the entire room without saying a single word. The sea of guests parted abruptly as Chloe marched directly toward us. She was wearing a heavy emerald green gown that looked distinctly like a desperate attempt to scream old money. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her champagne flute. She stopped directly in my path, her eyes raking over my pristine white suit with a toxic mixture of intense jealousy and deep confusion. She had fully expected to see me in a cheap black uniform, carrying a trash bag. Nia Chloe scoffed, her voice pitched loud enough to ensure the surrounding socialites could hear every single word. I am genuinely shocked they let you pass the security gate. Beatrice explicitly told you to use the catering entrance. She glanced at Julian, her fake smile turning sharp and vicious. And Dr. Hayes, I am completely surprised to see you here. How much did Nia have to pay a high-class doctor to be her +1 to a party she can barely afford to attend? I hope you know she is only here to bust the tables when the real staff gets overwhelmed. Julian stiffened beside me, his jaw clenching as he prepared to dress her down. I pressed a single finger against his arm, silently telling him to hold his fire. I looked at Chloe. I did not scowl. I did not raise my voice. I gave her the exact same dead-eyed clinical stare I reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. Chloe. I said, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying the icy chill of absolute indifference. The actual caterers are over there by the buffet. If you need a napkin for the insecurity you are currently spilling all over the floor, I suggest you go ask them. I did not wait for her response. I simply stepped around her, as if she were a piece of misplaced furniture. Julian let out a low, sharp laugh and followed my lead perfectly. We left Chloe standing completely frozen in the middle of the ballroom, her face flushing a dark, humiliating shade of crimson, as the nearby guests turned their heads to hide their amused smirks. Julian and I glided toward the far end of the ballroom, taking up a strategic position near the tall arched windows. A waiter immediately offered us champagne. I took a glass simply to hold it, keeping my eyes locked on the center of the room. This was my observation deck. I needed to see exactly how deep the delusion ran before I pulled the plug. It did not take long to find him. MJ was standing in the most prominent section of the room, surrounded by a tight circle of local real estate investors and 2 city councilmen. He was holding a rocks glass of expensive bourbon, gesturing wildly with his free hand as he spun his web of absolute fiction. He was soaking up the adoration exactly like a golden child does, completely high on his own fabricated supply. I stepped just close enough to hear the pitch. The conglomerate reached out to me directly, MJ bragged, projecting his voice so his audience hung on every single word. They looked at the proprietary algorithms I built for MJ Innovations, and they knew they had to have a piece of the Washington infrastructure. I told them I was not interested in a traditional merger. I demanded they absorb the family debt portfolio as part of the seed funding package. You have to play hardball with these corporate venture capitalists. I essentially forced them to buy out our leverage so I could scale the tech division globally. The investors nodded approvingly, clapping him on the shoulder. They were congratulating him on being a visionary. They were praising him for saving the family business and securing a multi-million-dollar corporate partnership. My brother was standing in a room paid for by stolen Medicare funds, actively taking full credit for a hostile debt acquisition that was designed to render him homeless in less than 48 hours. Julian leaned down, his mouth hovering just near my ear so only I could hear him over the live jazz music. He actually believes his own lies, Julian murmured, a dark, heavy amusement lacing his tone. He thinks he outsmarted a Wall Street conglomerate with a fake pitch deck. Let him talk, Julian, I replied, my eyes fixed on my brother's smug, smiling face. The higher he builds this imaginary pedestal tonight, the harder the concrete is going to feel when he hits the ground. The live jazz orchestra brought their set to a smooth, lingering close as the heavy velvet curtains at the back of the stage parted. The general murmur of the ballroom faded into a hushed, expectant silence. Beatrice Washington stepped up to the crystal podium, bathing in the warm glow of a dozen strategically placed spotlights. She wore a floor-length gown of shimmering gold sequins, dripping in diamonds paid for by the very debt I was about to collect. She tapped the microphone with a perfectly manicured fingernail. The sharp sound commanded absolute obedience from every socialite, politician, and church elder in the room. Family, friends, and distinguished guests. My mother began, her voice resonating with the practiced, velvety cadence of a mega-church matriarch. Welcome to a night of triumph. We have gathered you all here in this beautiful ballroom to celebrate the enduring legacy of the Washington family. For decades, Marcus Sr. and I have poured our blood, sweat, and tears into building an empire of senior care facilities. We did it to serve our beautiful community, to provide shelter for our elders, and to demonstrate the undeniable power of Black excellence in Atlanta. The crowd erupted into polite, admiring applause. My father stood at the edge of the stage, puffing out his chest and nodding solemnly as if he were a decorated war hero rather than a complicit fraudster. But the business world is full of trials. Beatrice continued, her tone shifting into a masterful display of manufactured vulnerability. We recently faced a season of intense economic persecution. The banks tried to count us out. The system tried to tear down what a hardworking Black family had built. We needed a miracle, and the Lord in His infinite wisdom provided us with a savior from our very own bloodline. She extended her arm toward the side of the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the man who secured a historic multi-million-dollar corporate partnership to save our family legacy. My son, the visionary Marcus Washington Jr. The ballroom exploded into thunderous applause. MJ strutted onto the stage, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo. He flashed a brilliant, entirely unearned smile, waving to the crowd like a conquering king. He took the microphone from my mother, soaking in the adoration. "Thank you, Mom," MJ said smoothly, his voice echoing through the massive room. "It was not easy. These massive corporate conglomerates think they can intimidate us. But I walked into their boardroom. I laid down my proprietary business models, and I made them realize that the Washington infrastructure is absolutely untouchable. I forced them to buy out our debt and fund our global expansion. We are not just surviving anymore. We are taking over." The church aunties cheered wildly. The real estate investors raised their champagne glasses in a unified toast. My brother was standing on a stage, publicly taking credit for negotiating a hostile corporate takeover that was designed to completely obliterate him. The sheer staggering delusion was mesmerizing to witness. Beatrice took the microphone back, her eyes sweeping over the cheering crowd. She was riding a high of supreme narcissistic validation, entirely drunk on her own fabricated reality. As her gaze swept across the room, she finally spotted me standing by the arched windows. The optic white of my custom suit stood out like a beacon against the dark evening wear of the surrounding guests. Her smile froze for a fraction of a second. She had explicitly ordered me to wear a catering uniform. She had expected me to be hiding in the shadows, gathering dirty napkins and keeping my head down. Seeing me standing tall, exuding absolute corporate authority with a prominent, highly respected physician by my side, clearly infuriated her. But my mother never retreated from a chance to inflict emotional damage. She leaned closer to the microphone, deciding to weaponize her platform to crush me in front of the entire Atlanta elite. But true leadership is not just about the ones who rise to the top, Beatrice announced, her voice dripping with toxic, sugary condescension. It is also about showing grace to those who fall behind. She pointed a single diamond-ringed finger directly at me. The spotlights literally shifted, tracking her gesture, illuminating Julian and me in a blinding pool of white light. Hundreds of heads turned in unison to stare at us. "My daughter Nia is standing in the back," Beatrice declared, making sure every syllable echoed clearly through the ballroom. "I invited her tonight despite her history of making very poor choices. Nia has always struggled to keep up with the brilliance of this family. She works a little data entry job and lives a very quiet, very limited life. I told her to wear black tonight so she could help the serving staff earn her keep. But I see she decided to play dress up instead to pretend she belongs in this room. A collective, deeply uncomfortable gasp rippled through the crowd. The mayor looked down at his shoes. Several politicians shifted awkwardly. It was a brutal, classless, shockingly cruel public execution. I hope tonight serves as a valuable lesson for you, Nia, my mother continued, her voice echoing with ruthless superiority. I hope standing in the presence of your brother teaches you what true success looks like. Maybe if you take careful notes from MJ, you will learn how to build something real instead of relying on the charity of this family to keep a roof over your head. She lowered the microphone. Chloe, standing near the front row, let out a loud, mocking laugh. MJ smirked, crossing his arms and looking at me with pure disdain. The silence that followed was suffocating. The guests did not know how to react to a mother publicly gutting her own child. The applause that eventually trickled through the room was scattered, weak, and intensely awkward. People clapped simply to fill the heavy, agonizing silence. Beside me, Julian went completely rigid. I felt the heat of his absolute fury radiating off his body. His jaw locked, and the muscles in his neck tightened into thick cords. He gripped my hand, his fingers squeezing mine so hard it was almost painful. He leaned down, his voice a low, dangerous rumble meant only for my ears. "Give me the word," Julian whispered fiercely. "Give me the word, and I will march onto that stage and rip the microphone out of her hand. I will end this right now." I did not break eye contact with my mother. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. The venom in her words had absolutely no effect on me, because her words were entirely based on a reality that no longer existed. She was firing blank bullets at a bulletproof vest. I gently squeezed Julian's hand in return, anchoring him. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of submission. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster, watching her opponent enthusiastically move their king onto a doomed square. "No," I replied softly, my eyes tracking the heavy brass doors at the back of the ballroom. "Let her enjoy her applause, Julian. Our cue is walking through those doors in exactly 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8. I counted down silently in my head, keeping my eyes locked on the heavy brass doors at the back of the grand ballroom. The final smattering of applause from my mother's cruel speech was still echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Chloe was smirking at me from the front row, fully believing I had just been verbally destroyed. MJ was adjusting his tie, practically glowing with unearned triumph. 3, 2, 1. The brass doors swung open with a heavy, resonant thud that cut through the lingering chatter of the Atlanta elite. Stepping through the threshold was Robert, my lead corporate attorney. He did not look like a party guest. While the rest of the room was dressed in flowing sequins and colorful tuxedos, Robert wore a dark charcoal suit with the sharp, uncompromising posture of a legal executioner. In his right hand, he carried a thick combination locked briefcase made of black leather. It held the finalized foreclosure documents, the asset liquidation mandates, and the undeniable proof of the Washington family's federal Medicare fraud. The security guards at the door immediately stepped aside, recognizing the sheer, unyielding authority radiating from him. Robert walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, his dress shoes clicking against the polished hardwood floor. He did not look left or right. He did not acknowledge the mayor or the church elders. He moved with the terrifying precision of a heat-seeking missile locked directly onto the stage. Beatrice Washington's eyes darted toward the back of the room. I watched her expression morph from irritation at the sudden disruption to a wide, predatory realization. She recognized the archetype immediately. To her desperate, greedy mind, Robert was not a threat. He was the golden goose. She firmly believed he was the corporate emissary from the anonymous conglomerate, the man-hand delivering the finalized buyout contracts and the multi-million-dollar wire transfer that would save them from federal prison. My mother practically shoved the crystal podium aside. She grabbed Marcus Sr. by the arm and gestured wildly for MJ to follow her. The three of them rushed down the velvet-carpeted steps of the stage, descending into the crowd, like royalty greeting a highly anticipated dignitary. The guests parted, forming a wide circle in the center of the ballroom, as Beatrice intercepted Robert halfway down the aisle. Welcome to the Oak Ridge Country Club. My mother projected her voice, amplifying her words so every single socialite and politician in the room could hear the interaction. She extended both her hands, her diamond bracelets catching the light, flashing a blinding, aggressively charming smile. We were just speaking about your esteemed conglomerate. You must be the chief legal representative handling the acquisition. Marcus Sr. puffed out his chest, standing tall next to his wife. We are absolutely thrilled to finalize this partnership tonight, he boomed, clapping his hands together. Timing is everything in business, and your firm certainly knows how to make a grand entrance. MJ could not resist inserting himself directly into the spotlight. He stepped in front of his parents, aggressively extending his hand toward Robert. Marcus Washington Jr., he announced using his deepest, most authoritative executive voice. Founder and CEO of MJ Innovations. I assume you brought the finalized seed funding contracts for the tech division. My banking team is on standby to authorize the wire transfer into our corporate accounts. We are ready to scale this operation globally as soon as the funds clear. The church aunties murmured in awe. The local investors leaned in, trying to catch a glimpse of the high-powered corporate lawyer securing the Washington empire. My mother looked around the room, soaking in the envious stares of her peers. She was riding the absolute peak of her delusion, convinced she had successfully outsmarted the federal government, the banks, and her own financial incompetence. Robert stopped walking. He stood in the dead center of the grand ballroom, completely surrounded by the Washington family and their hundreds of elite guests. He looked at MJ's extended hand. He looked at my mother's desperate, hungry smile. He did not reach out. He did not return the smile. His expression remained as cold and impenetrable as a block of solid ice. Slowly, Robert set his black leather briefcase onto a nearby cocktail table, the metallic snap of the heavy brass locks echoing loudly in the suddenly quiet room. Mrs. Washington, Robert began, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried no warmth, no congratulations, and absolutely no mercy. I am the lead corporate counsel for Apex Audit. However, there seems to be a catastrophic misunderstanding regarding the nature of my presence here tonight. My mother's smile faltered just a fraction of an inch. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed her eyes. Misunderstanding, she repeated, letting out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. I am sure whatever minor paperwork issues remain can be sorted out quickly. We are ready to sign the acquisition papers right now. Robert snapped the briefcase open. He did not pull out a welcoming folder or a ceremonial check. He pulled out a stack of documents bearing the stark, undeniable seal of the State Superior Court. I am not here to finalize an acquisition, Robert stated loudly, projecting his voice so the mayor, the pastor, and every single guest in the front rows heard him with crystal clarity. And I am certainly not here to transfer any funds into your son's account. MJ dropped his hand, his arrogant posture instantly collapsing into defensive confusion. Wait, what are you talking about? He demanded, his voice cracking slightly. The term sheet was already approved. The buyout was guaranteed. You are the buyers. We are not the buyers, Robert corrected, stepping back and holding the legal documents against his chest. As of 8 o'clock yesterday morning, Apex Audit executed a hostile debt acquisition. We purchased the entirety of your commercial mortgages, your equipment loans, and the primary collateral securing your business. We did not buy your company, Mr. Washington. We bought your debt. The ballroom plunged into a profound, suffocating silence. The clinking of glasses ceased entirely. Chloe, who had pushed her way to the front of the crowd, gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Marcus Sr. went completely rigid, the blood rapidly draining from his face. My mother stumbled backward a step, her gold-sequined dress suddenly looking heavy and ridiculous. What do you mean you bought our debt? She whispered, panic finally clawing its way up her throat. You are a corporate conglomerate. We are negotiating a partnership. You need to speak to my husband and my son right now. Robert shook his head, shutting down the gaslighting with brutal legal efficiency. I do not negotiate with embezzlers, Mrs. Washington. I am simply here to deliver the formal notices of asset liquidation and immediate foreclosure on your nursing home facilities and your primary residence in Buckhead." The crowd erupted into shocked, violent whispers. The word foreclosure rippled through the room like wildfire, destroying the perfect affluent facade in a matter of seconds. Beatrice Washington, the untouchable matriarch, was being publicly served eviction papers in front of her entire congregation. "You cannot do this!" my mother shrieked, abandoning all pretense of Southern grace. She pointed a trembling finger at Robert. "Who authorized this? Who is running this firm? I demand to speak to your boss. I demand to speak to the chief executive officer of Apex Audit right this second." Robert finally smiled, a cold, sharp expression that signaled the absolute end of the game. He turned his body, perfectly pivoting away from the stage and gesturing directly toward the arched windows at the back of the room. He gestured directly at me. "That can be easily arranged, Mrs. Washington," Robert announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "I am here representing your sole creditor. Allow me to introduce our CEO." Robert extended his arm toward the arched windows at the back of the ballroom. Hundreds of heads swiveled in unison, following the trajectory of his hand. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide, unobstructed path directly to where Julian and I stood. The heavy silence in the room was absolute, a suffocating vacuum that sucked the air from the lungs of every elite guest present. Beatrice Washington stared at me. Her meticulously curated smile completely froze, locking her facial features into a grotesque mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. Her brain was visibly short-circuiting, utterly unable to reconcile the image of the daughter she had just publicly humiliated with the title of Chief Executive Officer. Beside her, the reality of the moment hit my father with physical force. The heavy crystal rocks glass slipped from Marcus Sr.'s trembling fingers. It hit the polished hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crash, shattering into dozens of pieces. The expensive amber bourbon splashed across the toes of his polished dress shoes, but he did not even flinch. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the blood entirely drained from his face. Then the sharp, aggressive sound of forced laughter shattered the quiet. MJ stepped forward, slapping his hand against his thigh. He shook his head, looking around at the bewildered faces of the investors and church elders desperately trying to commandeer the narrative. "This is a joke, right?" MJ scoffed, his voice loud and dripping with toxic condescension. He pointed a finger at me, his laughter echoing harshly against the high ceilings. "You hired an actor to come in here and ruin my night." "That is pathetic, Nia. Even for you, this is a new low. Everyone in this room knows exactly what you do. You input medical data for a living. You are a clerk. You can barely afford the rent on your little apartment, and you expect these people to believe you run a corporate conglomerate." Chloe immediately latched onto his denial, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with her husband. She crossed her arms, her emerald green gown shimmering as she sneered at me. "Honestly, Beatrice, you need to have security remove her," Chloe demanded. "She is clearly having some sort of mental breakdown. She probably rented that white suit just to come here and cause a scene because she is jealous of MJ." I did not raise my voice to argue with them. I did not look at Chloe at all. I gently let go of Julian's hand. He gave my fingers one last reassuring squeeze, stepping back just a fraction of an inch to let me take the floor. I began to walk down the center aisle of the ballroom. The rhythmic, authoritative click of my crimson stiletto heels echoed like a metronome in the dead silent room. The crowd of socialites, politicians, and church members shrank back, pulling their expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos out of my path. I did not look like a broken, jealous sister throwing a tantrum. I moved with the terrifying, untouchable grace of a corporate titan, preparing to execute a hostile takeover. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from my brother. Robert, my attorney, smoothly stepped to my right side, standing at attention, like a loyal soldier waiting for his general's command. I looked at MJ's smug, arrogant face. I saw the desperate, clawing need for validation hiding right behind his aggressive posture. "I own Apex Audit, MJ," I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom with cold, absolute clarity. "I am the sole founder and the chief executive officer. Apex is the company you have been begging for a bailout for the last 6 months. MJ blinked, his forced smile faltering. You are lying, he snapped, though his voice lacked its previous volume. You do not have the capital or the education to build a company like that. I am the entrepreneur in this family. You are a parasite in a tailored suit, I corrected him smoothly, not breaking eye contact. You assume I am a data entry clerk because you and our parents are entirely blinded by your own prejudice. While you were draining our parents' retirement accounts to fund your imaginary startups and your luxury vacations, I identified a gap in the healthcare compliance market. I secured independent venture capital. I built a multi-million-dollar corporation from the ground up. I did not ask for a single dime of family money because I knew the only thing this family invests in is your towering delusion. My mother finally found her voice. She stepped off the stage, her gold-sequined dress rustling as she pushed past MJ. Nia. Stop this nonsense right now, Beatrice commanded, falling back on her decades of maternal manipulation. You are humiliating us in front of the mayor. I do not know what kind of fraudulent paperwork you paid this man to bring here, but you do not own our debt. You are my daughter. You obey me. Tell everyone this is a misunderstanding and go back to the kitchen. I turned my gaze to Beatrice, the woman who had told me to stop faking a life-threatening allergic reaction. The woman who had invited me tonight purely to treat me like a servant. You do not give me orders anymore, Beatrice. I stated, my tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. I am not your scapegoat, and I am certainly not your caterer. Look at the documents Robert handed you. Look at the signature authorizing the massive acquisition of your toxic commercial loans. My father, his hands shaking violently, picked up the legal notice Robert had placed on the cocktail table. He flipped to the final page. I watched his eyes scan the bottom line. He saw it. My bold, unmistakable signature authorizing the deployment of millions of dollars to buy the Washington family debt outright. Marcus Sr. looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror. It is her, he whispered, his voice trembling so badly it cracked. Beatrice, she is telling the truth. Nia signed the wire transfer. She owns the mortgages. She owns the nursing homes. She owns the house. The collective gasp from the ballroom guests was loud enough to rival thunder. The elite members of Atlanta society were watching the total, unmitigated destruction of the Washington dynasty. They realized in real time that they were not attending a victory gala. They were attending a financial funeral. MJ snatched the paperwork out of my father's hands, frantically scanning the legal jargon. No, he muttered, his eyes darting wildly across the pages. No, this is illegal. You cannot just buy our debt without our permission. We were negotiating a partnership. I sent the pitch deck. They loved the pitch deck. Your pitch deck was a joke, MJ. I shot back, dismantling his ego piece by piece. My vice president of acquisitions threw you out of my lobby because your financial projections were entirely fabricated. You do not have a company, you have a criminal slush fund. And I decided it was time to shut off the tap. Chloe took a step backward, looking at MJ with sudden creeping terror. What does she mean, a criminal slush fund? Chloe demanded, her voice shrill. MJ, what is she talking about? You said we were getting millions today. You said we were buying a summer home. You are not buying anything, Chloe, I replied, shifting my gaze to my sister-in-law. In fact, you might want to start packing those designer bags you bought with stolen money. Because the bank no longer holds the deed to your lifestyle. I do. I did not give Chloe a single second to process the reality of her impending poverty. I turned back to Robert and extended my hand. My attorney immediately placed a thick black binder directly into my palm. It was the complete finalized forensic audit report generated by my executive team just 48 hours prior. I held the binder up so the heavy gold lettering of the Apex Audit logo was visible to every single investor and politician crowding around us. I am not buying your company. I repeated, my voice ringing with absolute chilling clarity. I bought your debt, and I did not just buy the commercial mortgages on the nursing homes. I ordered my team to execute a full forensic audit of your financial ledgers before I authorized the capital transfer. I know exactly why you were begging for a corporate bailout. My father took a stumbling step backward, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw breath. Beatrice reached out to grab his arm, her long manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Do not open that folder, Nia," my mother hissed, her voice dropping into a desperate guttural whisper. "Whatever you think you found, you are misunderstanding the business strategy. We can go into a private room right now and discuss this as a family. Do not do this in front of the pastor. You lost the right to handle things privately when you decided to invite me here tonight to bus your tables," I replied, my gaze sweeping over her terrified face. "You wanted to teach me a lesson about true success in front of all your friends. So class is officially in session." I flipped open the heavy black binder. The sharp snap of the metal rings echoed in the dead silent ballroom. I did not look at my family. I looked directly at the crowd of elite socialites, the local politicians, and the church members who had worshipped the Washington family for decades. For the past 18 months, I read aloud my voice, projecting effortlessly. Marcus Washington Jr. has been systematically embezzling federal funds from the Washington Senior Care Facilities. He set up a ghost entity called MJ Innovations. According to the corporate filings, this company was contracted to provide advanced respiratory equipment and specialized medical software to vulnerable elderly residents. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle over the room. I turned to look at MJ. He was sweating profusely now, a thick bead of moisture trailing down his temple. His jaw was slack, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors. However, I continued turning the page of the audit report. MJ Innovations provided absolutely zero medical equipment. It is nothing but a fraudulent shell company. My brother has been submitting falsified invoices to Medicare and siphoning the federal payouts directly into his personal bank accounts. The collective gasp from the audience was visceral. The word Medicare sent a shockwave of genuine legal terror through the wealthy crowd. Embezzling private funds was a scandal, but defrauding the federal government was an absolute guaranteed path to federal prison. The mayor, who had been standing just a few feet away from my father, subtly but deliberately took 3 large steps backward, physically distancing himself from the toxic fallout. "That is a lie!" MJ shouted, his voice cracking with panicked desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is making this up because she is jealous. I built that tech company from scratch. I have proprietary algorithms. You have a receipt for a $200,000 customized Mercedes G-Wagon registered in your wife's name," I shot back instantly, shutting down his pathetic defense. I flipped to the next page of the forensic ledger. "I have the bank transfer records for first-class flights to Tulum. I have the credit card statements showing massive 6-figure purchases at designer boutiques in Buckhead. I have the receipts for the exact emerald green gown Chloe is wearing right now. Every single stitch of clothing on your backs, every luxury vacation you took, every expensive dinner you bought to impress these investors was paid for with stolen money." I turned to face the crowd again, making sure my voice carried to the very back of the room. "You stole $2 million, MJ. You stole it from the operational budgets meant to keep the elderly residents of your parents' nursing homes alive." Julian stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. His presence as a highly respected physician lent absolute devastating credibility to my claims. "I am the consulting pulmonologist for 3 of those facilities," Julian announced, his deep voice resonating with righteous anger. "I have patients who are struggling to breathe because the oxygen concentrators and CPAP machines we ordered never arrived. Now we know exactly why. The money for their life-saving equipment was sitting on Chloe's wrist in the form of a diamond tennis bracelet. The flawless facade of the affluent, perfect African-American family completely shattered in real time. The illusion evaporated, leaving nothing but the ugly, undeniable rot underneath. The church aunties who had been praising my mother just 20 minutes ago were now staring at her with profound, unmasked disgust. Pastor Thomas shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment etched across his face. The local real estate investors who had been congratulating MJ were now glaring at him furiously, calculating their own legal exposure for associating with a federal fraudster. Chloe turned slowly to look at her husband. Her arrogant sneer had completely vanished, replaced by a mask of absolute bone-chilling horror. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and sickly under the crystal chandeliers. She was slowly realizing that her name on the title of that luxury vehicle made her legally complicit in a federal crime. M.J. She whispered, her voice trembling violently. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you actually have the government contracts. Tell me you did not buy my car with stolen Medicare money. MJ could not even look his wife in the eye. He stared at the polished hardwood floor, his chest heaving as the reality of his impending federal indictment crashed down on him. The golden child had been stripped of his armor, his funding, and his delusion, all in the span of 5 minutes. Beatrice Washington let out a strangled sob. It was not a cry of remorse for the stolen money or the suffering patients. It was the agonizing wail of a narcissist watching her meticulously curated social standing burn to absolute ash. The people she cared about most, the elite circles she had sacrificed her own daughter to impress, were looking at her like she was a criminal. Because that is exactly what she was. I closed the black binder with a loud, definitive snap. I handed it back to Robert, who slid it smoothly into his briefcase. I looked at the wreckage of my family, completely unmoved by their tears and their panic. They had built an empire on lies, and I had just delivered the earthquake. Beatrice Washington could not tolerate the silence. She could not stomach the look of absolute disgust radiating from the church elders and the local politicians she had spent 3 decades desperately trying to impress. The sheer terror of losing her social standing triggered a frantic, almost primal response. She lunged toward the crystal podium, her gold-sequined gown catching on a chair as she desperately grabbed the microphone. A harsh, high-pitched squeal of audio feedback pierced the ballroom, making several guests wince and cover their ears. "Please, everyone, you must listen to me!" Beatrice cried out into the microphone. Her voice trembled thick with forced theatrical tears. She was instantly pivoting to the only defense mechanism she knew, playing the ultimate victim. The devil is truly working in this room tonight. You all know my heart. You know this family. We are a family built on faith and love. She pointed a shaking diamond-clad hand at me, her face twisting into a mask of maternal heartbreak. Do not listen to these vicious lies. My daughter Nia has always been deeply troubled. She has always harbored a dark, bitter jealousy toward her brother. She has let corporate greed and secular ambition completely poison her soul. She is bringing these fabricated documents here tonight to destroy her own blood. She is trying to steal our legacy for money. We need to pray for her. Pastor Thomas, please, we need to pray for her soul. She looked toward the front row, expecting the pastor to step forward to place a comforting hand on her shoulder to validate her performance as the long-suffering mother. Pastor Thomas did not move a single inch. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his expression a mixture of profound sorrow and deep revulsion. He looked at my mother, then he looked at the black binder resting in Robert's briefcase, and he slowly shook his head. The church was not going to save her. I did not let her spin her toxic web for another second. I took 2 deliberate steps toward the stage. I did not ask for the microphone. I did not need artificial amplification. My voice carried across the marble floors and vaulted ceilings with the chilling, undeniable resonance of absolute truth. Do not dare invoke God to cover up your federal crimes, Beatrice, I commanded, shutting her down instantly. The sheer authority in my tone made her flinch backward, the microphone dropping slightly from her mouth. You want to stand on that stage and preach to these people about family? I continued, my voice echoing in the dead quiet ballroom. You want to talk about blood and love and legacy? Let us talk about family. Just last week I was lying on the floor of your grand estate. My throat was completely swollen shut. My lungs were failing. I was in full anaphylactic shock because your precious daughter-in-law deliberately contaminated my hands with a deadly allergen. I took another step forward, locking my eyes entirely on her terrified face. I was suffocating, gasping for a single breath of air on your expensive imported rug. And what did you do, Mother? You did not call an ambulance. You did not scream for a doctor. You marched over my dying body, looked me dead in the eye, and snapped at me to quit faking it. The collective gasp from the elite crowd was audible. The horror spreading across the faces of the guests was visceral and real. They were looking at a monster dressed in gold sequins. You told me I was causing too much drama. I stated my words, striking her like physical blows. You told me to get up, get in the kitchen, and clean up a spill. You did not care if I died right there on your floor as long as your anniversary party was perfect. You prioritized a vanilla sheet cake over your own daughter's pulse. Beatrice opened her mouth to deny it, to spin another frantic web of gaslighting, but Julian stepped smoothly to my side. His presence as a highly respected medical professional cemented my account perfectly. She is telling the absolute truth, Julian announced to the crowd, his deep voice leaving no room for debate. I was the one who administered the epinephrine. I was the one who rode in the ambulance while her airway closed. Beatrice Washington explicitly told the paramedics to use the service elevator so the flashing lights would not ruin her aesthetics. She abandoned her daughter to die. My mother's legs gave out. She crumpled against the crystal podium, her sobbing no longer theatrical but fueled by the horrifying realization that her reputation was permanently, irrevocably obliterated. She was completely exposed. I did not offer her an ounce of pity. I turned my attention away from the weeping matriarch and locked my gaze on the man standing paralyzed at the edge of the stage. My father, Marcus Sr., was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped, his entire posture reeking of cowardice. I addressed him next, making sure every guest heard the final verdict. You walked into my intensive care unit 24 hours later, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. I was hooked up to a heart monitor and an intravenous line. And you stood at the foot of my hospital bed and demanded I hand over the keys to my apartment so Chloe would not have to smell wood stain. Marcus Sr. swallowed hard, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked like a hollow, empty shell of a man. When I said no, you erupted. I continued relentlessly. You pointed your finger in my face. You called me a bitter, jealous woman. You disowned me. You told me I was cut off from this family for being a selfish daughter who refused to support black male excellence. I raised my arm and pointed a single steady finger directly at MJ. My brother flinched, shrinking back against the stage curtains as if my gaze physically burned him. But the real parasite is standing right next to you, I declared, my voice echoing with devastating finality. You sacrificed your only daughter to prop up a fraudulent, incompetent thief. You signed your name to forged Medicare documents because you were too weak to tell your golden child no. You enabled his delusion, you funded his arrogance, and you literally signed away the deed to your own home to keep his lies afloat. I did not destroy this family. You did. And now you get to live in the wreckage. The silence following my words was absolute, but the illusion of the Washington family was not just broken, it was vaporized. The reality of the situation crashed over the remaining people on that stage, but it hit Chloe the hardest. She stood a few feet away from MJ, staring at him as if he had suddenly mutated into a different species. The emerald green gown that had made her look like a queen just an hour ago now looked like a neon sign broadcasting her complicity in federal fraud. Chloe's eyes darted from the black binder in Robert's hands to the terrified, sweaty face of her husband. "You lied to me!" Chloe shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet of the ballroom. Her Southern Belle facade completely dissolved, replaced by a harsh, grating panic. "You told me you were a tech genius. You told me the venture capital was legitimate. You swore that the Mercedes and the diamonds were paid for by your corporate contracts." MJ held up his hands, taking a desperate step toward her. "Baby, please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I can fix this. I have investors lined up. We just need to weather this storm, and I will bounce back. I promise." "Fix this!" Chloe screamed, her face turning a mottled shade of red. "You stole $2 million from dying people, MJ. You bought my wedding ring with stolen Medicare money. Do you have any idea what my family will say? Do you know what kind of legal trouble you just dragged me into? I married a visionary entrepreneur, not a common thief headed for federal prison. I did not sign up to be poor." The sheer audacity of her gold-digging nature was laid bare for the entire Atlanta elite to witness. She did not care about the elderly patients suffering without oxygen. She did not care about the absolute devastation of the family that had housed and funded her. She only cared about her designer bags and her country club status. Chloe reached up and grabbed her left hand. With a vicious, jagged motion, she yanked the massive, custom-designed diamond ring off her finger. She did not hand it back to him. She threw it directly at his face. The heavy platinum ring struck MJ squarely in the chest before clattering onto the hardwood floor and rolling away into the shadows. "I am filing for divorce in the morning," Chloe spat out, turning on her heel. "Do not ever contact me again. I am taking the car, and I am taking my jewelry. You can rot in a jail cell by yourself." Chloe stormed down the center aisle of the ballroom, shoving past the stunned church elders and disappearing through the heavy brass doors without looking back a single time. MJ watched his wife abandon him, his jaw hanging open in absolute shock. The golden child had just been stripped of everything that validated his existence. His money was gone, his reputation was ashes. His beautiful trophy wife had just publicly humiliated and discarded him. He looked down at the empty space on the floor where his expensive wedding ring had landed, and then his gaze snapped up to meet mine. The fragile, unearned ego of Marcus Washington Jr. completely shattered. The realization that I, the sister he had mocked and belittled his entire life, was the architect of his total destruction, short-circuited his brain. He let out a primal, enraged roar. "You did this!" MJ screamed, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unhinged hatred. "You ruined my life!" He charged off the stage, throwing his entire body weight forward in a blind, violent rush directly toward me. He raised his fists, fully intending to strike me down in front of 100 witnesses. I did not take a single step backward. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. Before MJ could cross half the distance between us, Julian moved with terrifying speed. The doctor stepped smoothly in front of me, planting his feet and dropping his shoulder. He intercepted my brother's charge perfectly. Julian grabbed MJ by the lapels of his bespoke tuxedo, using MJ's own momentum against him, and slammed him forcefully face first onto the nearest cocktail table. Glasses shattered and champagne spilled everywhere. "Get off me!" MJ shrieked, kicking and thrashing wildly like an overgrown toddler throwing a temper tantrum. He clawed at the polished wood, trying to break free, but Julian held him pinned with effortless, uncompromising strength. "Do not move another inch." Julian commanded, his voice a low, lethal rumble that echoed with absolute authority. "If you try to touch her again, I will break your arm." Within seconds, 3 large security guards rushed into the center of the room. They grabbed MJ, wrestling his arms behind his back and hauling him off the table. My brother struggled against their grip, his expensive tuxedo jacket ripping at the seam. He was sobbing now, heavy, ugly tears streaming down his face as the security team forcibly dragged him backward. The entire ballroom watched in horrified fascination. The brilliant heir, the tech visionary, the pride of the Washington family, was reduced to a crying, thrashing spectacle, being restrained by country club security. It was the ultimate undeniable confirmation of his complete incompetence. I watched them secure him, feeling nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I turned my attention away from the pathetic display and looked back at Beatrice. My mother had collapsed onto a chair near the edge of the stage, her head buried in her hands, weeping uncontrollably over the total obliteration of her social empire. I signaled to Robert. My attorney silently unclasped the final compartment of his briefcase. He pulled out a crisp, heavy white envelope bearing the stark seal of the bank and the secondary seal of Apex Audit. He handed it to me. I walked slowly toward my mother. The rhythmic click of my crimson heels was the only sound cutting through her frantic sobbing. I stopped directly in front of her. She looked up at me through her tears, her mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "Beatrice," I said, dropping the title of mother completely. I held the heavy white envelope out to her. Her trembling hands reached out reluctantly, accepting the document as if it were coated in poison. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking with terror. "This is the formal, legally binding notice of asset liquidation," I stated clearly, ensuring the remaining guests heard the final crushing verdict. The financial games are officially over. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the properties. You are to surrender the keys to the 6 nursing home facilities, and you are to surrender the keys to the Buckhead mansion. My father, standing a few feet away, let out a choked gasp. Nia, please, where will we go? We have nothing else. We built that house. You built that house on a foundation of stolen money and immense cruelty, I replied, locking eyes with him. The banks own everything now. They own the business, they own the cars, and they own the roof over your head. And as of yesterday morning, I own the bank's debt. I looked back down at Beatrice, delivering the final devastating reality check. You told me I was a failure because I did not fit into your flawless narrative. You tried to force me into the kitchen to clean your messes. Now you get to pack your own boxes and walk out the front door of my property. Your 48-hour countdown begins right now. I did not wait for my mother to formulate another desperate defense. I simply stepped back, creating a physical boundary between myself and the toxic wreckage of their lives. The effect of my final statement rippled through the grand ballroom with devastating speed. The elite socialites, the politicians, and the church elders did not linger to offer comfort or support to the fallen matriarch. They operated on pure self-preservation. Associating with a family actively facing federal Medicare fraud indictments was social and professional suicide. The mass exodus began instantly. The mayor signaled to his security detail and briskly walked out the side exit without a single backward glance. Pastor Thomas, the man who had supposedly guided my family's spiritual journey for decades, silently signaled for his wife to gather her coat. They bypassed my parents entirely, refusing to even make eye contact as they hurried toward the coat check. The clinking of abandoned champagne glasses echoing against the crystal tables was the only sound accompanying the frantic shuffling of hundreds of expensive leather shoes retreating toward the heavy brass doors. Within 3 minutes, the lavish, densely packed ballroom had essentially emptied out. The magnificent victory gala my mother had engineered to celebrate her fraudulent wealth had transformed into a completely deserted, echoing cavern. Beatrice Washington sank slowly to her knees. The gold sequined fabric of her heavy designer gown pooled around her on the polished hardwood floor, making her look like a discarded broken doll. She clutched the white envelope containing the asset liquidation notice against her chest, her shoulders shaking with violent, ugly sobs. She was not crying for the elderly patients my brother had robbed. She was weeping for the absolute, unrecoverable death of her social empire. The people she had worshipped, the high society circles she had sacrificed her own daughter to impress, had just abandoned her at the first sign of a federal scandal. Marcus Sr. stood frozen a few feet away from her. The patriarch of the Washington family looked entirely hollowed out. His posture, usually so rigid and commanding, had completely collapsed. He stared blankly at the shattered pieces of his crystal rocks glass scattered across the floor, completely paralyzed by the terrifying reality of his impending poverty. He had spent his entire life taking the path of least resistance, enabling my mother's cruelty, and funding my brother's arrogance. Now the bill for his cowardice had finally come due, and he lacked the emotional currency to pay it. I looked at the three of them one last time. MJ was still being held by the country club security guards near the shattered cocktail table, his face stained with tears and spilled alcohol. Beatrice was weeping uncontrollably on the floor. Marcus Sr. was a broken, silent shell. For 32 years, I had fantasized about the moment I would finally prove my worth to them. I had imagined screaming, demanding apologies, forcing them to acknowledge every single ounce of pain they had inflicted upon me. But standing there in the wreckage of their enormous, fragile egos, I realized I did not want their apologies. An apology from a narcissist is just another manipulation tactic. I did not want to gloat. I did not want to stand over them and hurl insults. Gloating would imply that their opinions still held some sort of power over my emotional state. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I had surgically excised the cancer from my life, and I had no desire to play in the diseased tissue left behind. I turned my head slightly and met Julian's gaze. His dark eyes were steady, reflecting a deep, profound respect. He offered me his arm. I took it, sliding my hand smoothly into the crook of his elbow. We did not say another word to the Washington family. We simply turned our backs on them. Robert, my attorney, fell into step right behind us, his black leather briefcase securely locked. We walked down the long, empty center aisle of the ballroom together. The rhythmic click of my crimson stiletto heels echoed powerfully through the cavernous space, completely drowning out the pathetic, muffled sounds of my mother's crying. I did not look back. Not when we reached the heavy brass doors, not when the country club valet rushed to open them for us. I stepped out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night air, leaving the toxic, suffocating chapter of my life sealed inside that building forever. The valet brought my sleek, black luxury sedan to the front portico. Julian opened the passenger door for me, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back as I slid into the rich leather interior. He walked around the front of the vehicle and climbed into the driver's seat, seamlessly taking control of the wheel. Robert gave us a brief professional nod before heading toward his own vehicle to finalize the legal filings for the morning. Julian closed his door, sealing us inside the quiet, soundproofed cabin of the car. He started the engine, shifting the vehicle into gear and pulling smoothly out of the country club's winding, tree-lined driveway. The bright, garish lights of the grand estate faded into the rear-view mirror, swallowed completely by the darkness of the night. As the car merged onto the quiet interstate highway, the massive, surging wave of adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation finally began to recede. The physical toll of remaining perfectly stoic and unyielding in the face of such intense emotional warfare caught up to me all at once. My shoulders dropped. The rigid iron tension in my spine melted away. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest, closed my eyes, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I inhaled slowly, letting the cool, conditioned air fill my lungs completely, and then I exhaled. I let out a breath that I felt like I had been holding tightly in my chest for exactly 32 years. The suffocating weight of being the family's scapegoat, the constant draining vigilance required to navigate my mother's narcissism, the heavy crushing burden of making myself small to protect my brother's fragile ego. It all rushed out of my body in that single profound exhale. I was finally, truly free. Julian reached across the wide center console. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply took my hand, intertwining his strong, warm fingers with mine. His grip was an anchor, a steady grounding force in the quiet space of the car. "You did the right thing," Nia, Julian said, his voice a low, comforting rumble in the darkness. "You did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves. You just refused to let them drag you down into the grave they spent years digging. You protected yourself, and you protected the innocent people they were stealing from. What you did back there took a level of strength most people cannot even comprehend." I opened my eyes and looked at him. The dashboard lights cast a soft, warm glow across his handsome features. He was looking at the road ahead, but his thumb gently stroked the back of my hand, offering a silent, unwavering stream of support. "I know," I whispered softly, the raspy edge of my voice, a lingering reminder of the anaphylactic shock I had survived just a week prior. "I know I did the right thing, Julian, but it still feels strange. I spent my entire life trying to figure out how to survive them. I do not even know who I am without that fight." Julian smiled, a genuine, deeply reassuring expression that reached his dark eyes. "Then we will figure it out together, CEO. Washington," he replied smoothly, giving my hand a firm, validating squeeze. "You have a completely clean slate. You own your company, you own your future, and you have absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone. The hard part is officially over." I looked out the passenger window at the city lights blurring past us in the night. He was right. The battle was over and the victory was absolute. I tightened my grip on his hand, allowing myself to truly embrace the profound, hard-won peace of the present moment. I was no longer the discarded daughter fighting for a single breath of air. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the road ahead was wide open. 3 months passed with the ruthless, terrifying efficiency of a falling guillotine. The aftermath of the victory gala was not a slow, graceful decline. It was an absolute free-falling collapse. The federal government does not move slowly when millions of dollars in Medicare funds vanish into thin air. Within 72 hours of the gala, a fleet of unmarked black sport utility vehicles pulled up to the administrative headquarters of Washington Senior Care. Federal agents walked out carrying dozens of cardboard boxes filled with hard drives, employee records, and printed financial ledgers. The Department of Justice officially unsealed their indictments against Beatrice and Marcus Sr. exactly 1 month later. The charges included wire fraud conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and tax evasion. Under my strict corporate directive, the bank liquidated the Buckhead mansion and the 6 nursing home properties in record time. Every single piece of luxury furniture, every imported rug, and every crystal chandelier was auctioned off to the highest bidder to satisfy the commercial mortgages. My parents were forcefully evicted. With their assets entirely frozen by federal investigators, they had absolutely no financial safety net. Beatrice and Marcus Sr. were forced to move into a cramped, noisy 2-bedroom apartment complex right next to a busy interstate highway. It was a staggering, humiliating downgrade from their sprawling, perfectly manicured estate. Nobody fell harder or faster than the golden child. Without the endless flow of stolen capital bleeding from the nursing homes, MJ Innovations evaporated instantly. The luxury customized Mercedes was repossessed right out of Chloe's driveway. Predictably, Chloe filed for a highly aggressive scorched earth divorce the very morning after the gala. She hired a team of ruthless, bloodthirsty family law attorneys who essentially skinned my brother alive in court. Because MJ was drowning in a mountain of federal legal debt, he could not afford to fight her. He was utterly destitute. To pay for his cheap public defender, MJ was forced to take a minimum wage job working the night shift at a 24-hour retail warehouse. The brilliant visionary tech founder was now scanning barcodes and stacking heavy cardboard boxes at 3 in the morning, completely erased from the elite corporate world he once pretended to rule. He tried to call me once, leaving a desperate sobbing voicemail begging for a loan to keep him out of jail. I deleted the message before he even finished his sentence. He had to learn that the safety net he took for granted no longer existed. Despite her total financial ruin, Beatrice tried desperately to salvage her precious social standing. Her ego simply refused to accept defeat. She attempted to show up for Sunday service at our megachurch, fully expecting to play the victim of a massive government conspiracy. She wore one of her last remaining designer suits, hoping to command the sanctuary just like she used to. But the congregation had witnessed her true vicious nature at the country club. When she walked through the heavy wooden doors of the foyer, the lively chatter died instantly. The church aunties who used to hang on her every word physically turned their backs to her. No one offered a hug. No one offered a sympathetic smile. Pastor Thomas approached her before she could even take her usual seat in the front row. He respectfully but firmly asked her to step down from all her leadership committees and suggested she find a new place of worship until her federal criminal trial was concluded. She tried to post a tearful video on social media later that day, claiming she was a misunderstood matriarch under attack by a bitter daughter. The comment section was so viciously flooded by former employees and angry church members that she was forced to delete her entire account within 2 hours. The local country club revoked their membership later that same week, citing the morality clause in their bylaws. They were complete and total social pariahs in Atlanta. There was no one left to gaslight. There was no one left to manipulate. The flawless, affluent Washington facade was permanently buried in the dirt. While their toxic world burned to the ground, my empire soared to unprecedented heights. Apex Audit experienced massive exponential growth following the high-profile exposure of the Medicare fraud. Hospital networks and private clinics across the entire southeastern United States sought out our services, knowing my firm possessed the absolute highest standard of unyielding integrity. We became the gold standard for healthcare compliance. But I did not just want to audit corrupt companies and generate profit. I wanted to actively heal the deep lingering damage my family had inflicted on our community. I instituted a brand new heavily funded philanthropic wing of Apex Audit. We dedicated a massive percentage of our annual corporate profits directly to restructuring and improving conditions in minority-owned nursing facilities. I worked directly alongside Julian and his extensive network of dedicated medical professionals. We ensured that vulnerable elderly residents received the exact life-saving respiratory equipment my brother had stolen from them. We provided free top-tier compliance training to honest, hardworking facility administrators, ensuring they had the tools to thrive without ever cutting corners or compromising patient care. Julian and I spent our evenings reviewing grant applications and medical supply manifests, transforming our shared professional drive into a deeply fulfilling personal partnership. Our relationship grew stronger every single day, built on a foundation of absolute honesty and mutual respect. I took the exact toxic rot my mother exploited for her own vanity and transformed it into a powerful engine of genuine life-saving support. I was no longer defined by the trauma of my past. I was defining the future, proving that true Black excellence does not require tearing others down. 1 year later, the afternoon sun poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse, casting a warm golden glow across the sprawling open-concept living space. The atmosphere was a complete and total departure from the suffocating, rigid Sunday dinners I had endured at my parents' estate in Buckhead. There were no hushed arguments in the hallways. There was no desperate scrambling to impress church elders. There was only the rich, soulful sound of classic rhythm and blues playing softly through the surround sound speakers, and the incredible mouth-watering aroma of authentic, home-cooked food filling the air. I stood at the center of my custom marble kitchen island, but I was not wearing a restrictive black catering uniform. I wore a comfortable flowing silk wrap, and I was cooking because I genuinely wanted to. I was preparing a massive elevated Sunday feast for the people who actually mattered. The dining table was covered with plates of perfectly seasoned roasted chicken, truffle, macaroni, and cheese collard greens, smoked with turkey wings and fresh buttermilk biscuits. This was not a meal designed to show off wealth. It was a meal designed to nourish the people I loved. The penthouse was alive with genuine, unfiltered joy. My vice president of acquisitions. David was sitting on the plush leather sofa, laughing loudly at a joke made by Elena, my lead forensic accountant. Sarah, the head receptionist, who always made sure I had my black coffee every morning, was pouring herself a glass of imported red wine. These people were not just my employees, they were the brilliant, loyal circle of trust that had helped me secure my freedom. They were my chosen family. Julian walked into the kitchen carrying 2 crystal wine glasses. He had just finished a grueling 48-hour shift at the hospital, but he looked completely relaxed. He leaned against the marble island, sliding a glass of Cabernet toward me. He did not ask me to fetch anything for him. He did not demand that I make myself small to accommodate his ego. He simply looked at me with that same unwavering, profound respect that had anchored me on the darkest night of my life. I took a slow sip of the wine and looked out over the crowded, vibrant living room. The sheer contrast between my current reality and my traumatic past was staggering. For a moment, I want to speak directly to you. Yes, you watching and listening to this story. If you are a Black woman raised in a traditional household, you already know exactly what kind of invisible heavy chains we are expected to wear from birth. We are culturally conditioned to be the ultimate shock absorbers for everyone else's trauma. We are told to pray away the abuse. We are instructed to protect the men in our families at all costs, even when those men are actively destroying our peace. We are told that blood is thicker than water and that setting boundaries is a sign of disrespect or a lack of faith. They call it being a strong Black woman. But that label is often just a gilded cage designed to make us feel proud of carrying a burden we never should have picked up in the first place. True strength does not mean letting toxic relatives use your spine as a stepping stone for their own vanity. True strength is not staying quiet while people who share your DNA siphon your resources and diminish your light. True strength is knowing exactly when to set that heavy burden down. It is having the sheer, unadulterated courage to look at a poisoned family tree and decide that the rot absolutely stops with you. I had to become the villain in my mother's fabricated narrative so I could become the hero of my own actual reality. I had to let go of the desperate lifelong desire for my parents' approval, because their approval was always going to cost me my sanity. The family I was born into demanded my absolute submission. The family I chose, the people sitting around my dining table right now, simply demanded my authenticity. They did not care about a flawless social facade. They showed up for me when the alarms were blaring and the walls were caving in. That is what real family does. They do not leave you gasping for air on a ballroom floor. They ride in the ambulance with you. "Dinner is ready," I announced, my voice carrying easily over the music. The room erupted into cheerful chaos as everyone moved toward the massive dining table. Plates were passed around, stories were shared, and the sound of genuine booming laughter bounced off the high penthouse ceilings. Julian took the seat right next to me. As the meal began to wind down, he tapped his fork lightly against his crystal wine glass. The room quieted immediately, turning their attention to him. Julian stood up, raising his glass high. He looked around the table at the incredibly loyal, dedicated team we had built together, and then his dark eyes locked entirely on me. "I want to propose a toast," Julian said, his deep voice resonating with absolute pride. "To the founder, to the chief executive officer, and to the most brilliant, resilient woman I have ever had the privilege of knowing. You took a nightmare and turned it into an empire. To Nia." To Nia, the entire table echoed, raising their glasses in perfect unison. I stood up slowly, holding my own glass of wine. I looked at the beautiful, smiling faces of my chosen family. I felt a profound, unshakable peace settle deep into my bones. The scared, suffocating girl was gone forever. The corporate titan remained, but her heart was completely whole. I raised my glass to meet Julian's, letting a slow, victorious smile spread across my face. I thought about the towering glass building I owned downtown. I thought about the philanthropic wing changing lives across the city. And I thought about the people sitting in a cramped apartment by the highway, finally facing the consequences of their own cruelty. They tried to bury me to build their empire. I said, my voice perfectly steady and ringing with the ultimate undeniable truth. They did not realize I was the one who owned the ground they stood on. The most profound lesson from Nia's journey is that true strength isn't about enduring toxic behavior just because it comes from blood relatives. We are often taught to tolerate manipulation to keep the peace, but your worth is never determined by those who try to tear you down. Real empowerment comes from establishing absolute boundaries and walking away from environments that demand your constant sacrifice. Family is not just about DNA, it is about who respects you and celebrates your authentic success. When you stop carrying the weight of other people's brokenness, you gain the freedom to build your own empire. If you have ever had to set hard boundaries to protect your peace, share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more empowering journeys.